domain here, the community, and so obviously don't share any information that you do not want to become part of the public domain. And a warm welcome and thanks to our members and sustaining members, Microsoft. I think Christina Yasuda is going to be coming into the room along the way, who will be our member in lead member, and Pam Dingle is also acting as our alternate board member representative. So warm welcome, warm thanks to Microsoft for obviously hosting us in this wonderful facility. For our agenda, we're going to, we've had our brief welcome already. Sorry for those of you online who've missed it. And then we'll jump into the Open Wallet Foundation update and the GAIN update, two of the initiatives which the community has agreed to participate in over the last couple of years. And then we'll go into a couple of the white papers. You might recall that at the OpenID workshop here just before IIW last autumn, we kicked off and had our first listening sessions, and the lead editors sitting in front of me, Heather and Elizabeth, we're missing Mark, he's still on a plane on his way here. They were kind enough to start the listening session process and have diligently been working over the last 6 months to develop recommendations, and they'll share their insights today. We'll then have a break and we'll continue on with our working group update. So we'll start with the AB Connect working group update, followed by the OpenID for verifiable credentials special topic group, then move into EKYC and IDA. Again, poor Mark Hain is stuck on a plane, and so Torsten Lautersitz kindly agreed to provide his update today. Then we'll have the FAPI and the iGov working group updates and Moderna and shared signals. So you'll get the helicopter view. We'll have a pretty similar template for each of those working group updates to make sure you get the key themes of what the working group's covering, what their progress is in their roadmap, and what their plans are, as well as any key questions they hope to prompt during IIW this week, if any. And then we'll wrap up. We've left a little bit of a buffer for Q&A and member topics. As Nat and Vittorio and I were huddling last night, we were like, there are a lot of questions that are intriguing the community as a whole. And so hopefully we'll have a few minutes to either capture some questions that have come up that we haven't been able to address during the course of the conversation, or questions from the community that you'd like to prompt and get member feedback on. And we look forward to that. Then we'll close and we're ready to go. So thank you. On to the show. Starting with, oops, I've gone too fast. Please, welcoming up Torsten and Don to share some updates on the Open Wallet Foundation. You each get your own microphone.
I think one of the best ways of starting is to acknowledge some of our colleagues from the Linux Foundation who are here. Daniela and Hart, can you introduce yourself? And if you could talk a bit about your role at the foundation, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniela Barbosa, and I'm the general manager at the Linux Foundation for Blockchain and Identity Projects. I also serve as the executive director of the Hyperledger Foundation and support other blockchain projects at the Linux Foundation as well. So the Linux Foundation is obviously very interested in the work that's being discussed today. And for Open Wallet, it is one of our initiatives across the LF. That launched in February 23rd, so relatively new. And I get Daniel Goldscheider, who is the executive director, I believe is stuck on a plane or headed over. He's one of the ones that missed as well. Is that correct, Torsten?
Can I invite you to the front?
Oh.
So those online will see you.
Sure. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking.
So the latest information is he will be arriving tomorrow.
So Daniel Goldscheider is the executive director for the Open Wallet Foundation. I am looking forward to today's session and over to Hart.
Thanks, Daniela. So I'm Hart. Daniela hired me to be Hyperledger CTO almost a year ago. And I also now work as a technical advisor to the Open Wallet Foundation. And I've been working in open source for a pretty good while at this point, and I have a background in cryptography. So that's my story. Nice to meet you all. Hope to meet more of you later today and during the week.
And I assume both of you will be at IIW and presenting there, as will Torsten.
Yes.
One way of framing this, and I'd love to begin with you guys, is map out for us kind of relationships between Linux Foundation, Open Wallet Foundation, and folks like OpenID Foundation. How do they talk to each other, relate to each other, and how do they optimize the time and attention of people like folks in the audience?
And reducing fragmentation is certainly one of the key things that So the Linux Foundation, for those of you who do not know, for the last 20 years has been hosting open source projects, and these have primarily been code projects that sit under the Linux Foundation. There are over 600 different open source projects that are under the Linux Foundation greater umbrella. About 150 of them are what we call top line projects that might have 10, 12 different projects underneath it as well. So we like to complicate things as much as possible. About 3 years ago, we also started the Joint Development Foundation, which is where some of the standards and specification projects that fall under the Linux Foundation, including Trust over IP, and Judith is here today, as well as DIF, and we have Claire in the back, fall under as well. So the Linux Foundation is an umbrella organization, and we have code projects and standards and specification projects. The Open Wallet Foundation has, on launch, been very clear that it is focusing on code, not on standards and specifications. And if you look at the reach out that we've done throughout the community, for example, with OpenID and many of the other associate members of the Open Wallet Foundation, the goal is to be able to work collaboratively and not create fragmentation primarily for the developers. In this case, we're very interested in making sure that developers and the companies that support those developers and do the funding to support those developers have a very clear path as to where people need to participate. So we see it as very directional in how we support organizations like OpenID, and there's quite a few others as well. And Hart, maybe you can add a little bit to that in regards to like project governance and.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Daniela already said most of this, but we are trying to make sure that projects work well together, don't duplicate each other, even across different foundations and Linux Foundation groups. We're borrowing best project governance practices from various different projects, and we'd like to create something, a sort of communication structure around all of our projects in the area that we call digital trust. And so this is something we're actively doing to make sure that everyone talks to each other and make sure, we collaborate whenever possible. It's not always the case that everyone wants to collaborate. Sometimes two groups, have fundamental differences about how something is done and they want to do it differently, and that's great. But we don't want to unnecessarily fragment people. And even if you want to do something differently than someone else, we want you to have expressed that and made sure the communication is clear.
Can you talk a bit more about the digital trust piece?
Sure. So we'll be actually launching this officially in May at the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit, which is happening in Vancouver this year. And the Digital Trust Initiative is really an information hub for all projects at the Linux Foundation that are working with digital trust. This includes identity, but also includes groups like the Confidential Computing Foundation, which is another project. So there's various projects within the LF. And as leaders, as executive directors, for example, myself and Judith and Claire and others and Daniel, we want to make sure that there's some cohesive messaging across the Linux Foundation. So the Linux Foundation Digital Trust, if you hear that, and we'll be having a session at IIW tomorrow, hopefully in the afternoon or the day after, is really about just making sure that there's going to be a landing page at the Linux Foundation main website that informs when people come in and they say, this is what I want to do, this is how I want to contribute. It gives them paths to where at the Linux Foundation that work is being done. So the initiative is not a new member initiative. We're not going to be funding the Linux Foundation, Digital Trust Initiative. It's going to basically be an information hub to start with, to really just make sure that when you show up at the Linux Foundation, when your peers, when new companies, when new developers show up and they want to get involved in Linux Foundation projects working with digital trust, that they have clear paths to be successful there.
Cool. Let me just try one, for instance, out on you, and I'll pick on a friend of mine, George Fletcher, who helps lead teams at Capital One involved, I mean, no doubt, in digital wallets and identity. How does he relate to this hub? What's the value proposition for a technical team leader or an architect? What does George go back to his team and say, hey, I was at the OpenID Foundation workshop, I was at IW, and what's that piece that's going to be of most value?
Right. The one clear thing is at the Linux Foundation, all our projects are open for participation, right? You don't have to be a member of any Linux Foundation project to participate in the working groups, in the projects themselves, to be maintainers, to be contributors. And this is really important in kind of the ethos of the Linux Foundation, starting with the Linux kernel itself. So first thing, to that gentleman at Fidelity and any other companies is that they can show up and participate and contribute to the projects that they're interested in without having to be members across various member organizations. What we, of course, need to be clear is that the way that we fund the projects, right? The way that we give the developers tools, for example, the way that we do events and marketing and really get the story out of these projects in the marketplace is funded by the members. But many members are members of different Linux Foundation projects. We understand that gets very hard sometimes, and we encourage anybody who isn't quite sure where they want to contribute to show up to the projects that is of interest to them and get acquainted, right? These are open communities, get acquainted, get participating, and you don't need to be a member. If you are interested in saying, we have this kind of funding and our strategy as a company is to do X, Y, Z, come and talk to us and say, which projects should I get involved with and which ones are going to make my long-term strategy in regards to open source. And the key thing also is at the Linux Foundation, we're really focused in getting our members to understand how to operate in open source, how to be successful in open source communities, and how to contribute. And obviously how to build products and solutions using open source code. So there's always an umbrella of Linux Foundation assistance that we can provide large companies like Fidelity, and I know they're active in quite a few Linux Foundation projects that we can help with. But I reach out to myself or any of the other executive directors across the projects and say, this is my business strategy. These are the resources that I have. This is what I want to accomplish. Where should I invest my time for my developers, and where should I invest my funding dollars for the projects as well?
So, Danielle, if I get it right, the hub that you're talking about, which spans these different organizations and different initiatives, both within Linux Foundation and OpenID Foundation, et cetera, it's a efficiency proposition that you can go to the hub and navigate where you want to go and present projects idea.
Be very clear, the Digital Trust Initiative will highlight only Linux Foundation projects.
Okay.
They have to be under the Linux Foundation governance, one of the governance models. We have multiple project governances as well. Now, every other organization, whether it's OpenID or many of the others out there, can participate as associate members, right? You can become an associate member. And we participate, each project can also participate in other organizations as well, right? So I'll give you an example. At the Hyperledger Foundation, we are members of other associations that are doing work specifically around the projects, the Hyperledger projects that the community is interested in. And, the governing board decides which organizations we participate in, and that staff, and basically that we're allowing the Hyperledger Foundation to join as well. So it really depends on where you are, but the Digital Trust Initiative from a hub, an information hub perspective, is about Linux Foundation projects, okay?
And thanks for letting me put you on the spot. We'll see you later in the week or at break. That's a great transition for Torsten to talk about his role at the Open Wallet Foundation and to begin a conversation about how the OpenID Foundation best participates in some of the projects that Daniela just talked about. I think what we'd like to accomplish in our presentation here is just to not only orient folks, but also begin to give folks a kind of an understanding of propositions that might come from this community to Open Wallet Foundation and the impact of our standards in that world. Go.
Okay, hi, I'm Torsten. Most of you know me as part of the open standardization community in the identity space. I'm now helping the Open Wallet Foundation in a role as technical advisor. And I would like to speak about the objectives of the Open Wallet Foundation and how that relates to OpenID Foundation. I mean, decentralized identity is a big thing these days, right, Victoria? I guess you would agree on that. And there are a couple of challenges if you want to really put that into reality. Most notably, there are so many different protocols, formats, and so on out there. It really drives me crazy every time when I look onto that landscape. So building really competitive wallets that, for example, manage identities and driver's licenses and all that stuff require a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, and a lot of source code. And the idea is to provide a safe space, a safe development space, open development space for projects that want to build open source components for wallets, but also for the wider parties in a decentralized identity ecosystem. So protocol implementations, credential format implementations, all that stuff. The Open Wallet Foundation has been spoon up now. It's operational. And what we are looking for are project propositions. So we want to be this safe space for development, which is a different safe space than what we have at OpenID Foundation, because that's a safe space for doing standardization work, right? And the opportunity for OpenID Foundation is to convince people to build building blocks that people can use to utilize OpenID Foundation standards and wallets. For example, OpenID for verified credentials, but also other standards. And that's why it's important to get involved as an associate member, for example. What's most important is to really get those projects spoon up, the code projects, and to drive adoption of the different standards. And that's my mission for this week at IW, for example, to really talk to people that are interested in implementing wallets or decentralized identity solutions, and to talk to people that already have code and would like to contribute, and to somehow organize that and get Open Wallet Foundation from the ground.
Can you describe the starting point or the state of the code base of the Open Wallet Foundation as of today?
0. So we've got a safe place. Now we need to find the projects, and we are talking to a lot of different parties that are willing to contribute source code. But at the same time as we are talking to people that want to contribute source code, we also need to understand what's really needed, right? What's on the implementer side, and that's what I would like to focus on at IW, to talk to people what they want to implement. I mean, obviously there are some technical standards that are, for example, being chosen to implement mobile driver's licenses or to build the European Digital Identity Wallet. I mean, those are the standards I would like to focus on to start with. But in the end, we don't really know what the real pain points are right now of the implementers. And the first step is to really find that out and take that as an information to really build propositions that are compelling to implementers.
Talk a bit more about the mobile driver's license, because that's a proposition that keeps coming up again and again. How do those different code bases coalesce within, how might they coalesce within Open Wallet Foundation?
Yeah, hopefully we can consolidate those. First of all, we need initial contributions, right? We don't have them yet. I mean, we're talking with a couple of companies about contributions of ISO MDL code. And once they contribute that, I mean, we hope we can align and can consolidate that code base and improve it and extend it, right? That's the idea.
Great, let's open it up to questions from the audience. I think, again, what we want to do from an OpenID Foundation point of view, we are an associate member, one of the very first, I'm happy to say, and OpenID Foundation has been involved informally in the formation of the Open Wallet Foundation. So what we want to do is to find out very specifically where OpenID Foundation can be of value to Open Wallet and vice versa. And these first couple of propositions that Torsten talks about, I think really will set the tone and the pace for that collaboration. So we can talk about that a bit now or in more detail throughout the IIW week, but that's the direction of travel as we see it. Judith.
So I'm Judith Fleener, the Executive Director of the Trust Over IP Foundation. And I just want to be really clear because I've had a lot of conversations with Daniel Goldschneider, the Executive Director here who's stuck on a plane, that this is a code generation project. For standards, you still go to OpenID Foundation, you still go to DIF, Executive Director in the back. For trust frameworks and for governance stack working groups, things like that, you can go to OIX or Trust Over IP. And that is why OpenID Foundation, as well as Trust Over IP, as well as DIF, as well as OIX, have joined Open Wallet Foundation as associate members, because the standards that we are writing in all of these organizations and others, W3C, et cetera, you all know them, are just what guide the code projects that are being put into Open Wallet. And we want this to be a very safe and open place for people to be able to come and develop the code together, that it's being directed by the other foundations where the other very important pieces of identity solutions are being developed.
Thanks, Judith. I wanted to, whoop, just one moment, and John, I'll get to you in a moment. I wanted to introduce the most newly minted executive director in the ecosystem and give Claire a chance to introduce herself.
Thank you, Dan. Most gracious of you. So hello, everyone. My name is Claire Nelson. I've met many of you virtually. It's great to see you live and in person. And yes, I'm Claire Nelson, the new executive director of the Decentralized Identity Foundation. My name has been mentioned twice, so I thought I'd just say hi. I am collecting feedback as a new executive director. The first thing you need to do is collect feedback. So I have an open virtual door. Please connect with me and I'll see you throughout the week at IIW. Thanks, Dan.
Torsten, we have a question online that I'll raise. Sorry about that. Actually, we have a couple questions. How are you building security into the code base? How do you prevent bad actors from submitting malicious code?
Mark, do you want to answer the question? Use the microphone.
Awesome. I can field this one. So this, handling potentially malicious submissions to a code base is not something that's unique to the OWF by any stretch of the imagination. This is something that a lot of different projects in the Linux Foundation have had to deal with from time to time. We've had, in fact, some potentially, we thought they were malicious. It can be, there's the old saying that it's difficult to distinguish incompetence from maliciousness sometimes, but these certainly seem malicious on some level. So this is something we've had to deal with. All LF projects have to deal with this to some extent. And the idea is just to have, a rigorous code approval and testing process. So, typically when you submit a piece of code, you have to have a number of maintainers sign off the code. And the idea is if the maintainers do a good job of reviewing, they will catch the vast majority of these instances. So I hope that answers the question.
We have another, if I may. What are the intended object types for Open Wallet, or is it yet undetermined, and for contributors to share as ideas arise? I'm sorry. What are the intended object types for Open Wallet, or is it yet undetermined, and for contributors to share as ideas arise? Object types.
MDoc, et cetera, I think is what the question is.
But object type is a bit more general, right, than credential format. So, I mean, in the end, the scope is pretty large. So it's not only about identity. So we are considering to include all kinds of objects that one might have in this wallet. So payment instruments, crypto, identity credentials, other attestations, and so on. It's pretty open. In the end, it's determined by the contributors and the maintainers, what we will do.
I just wanted to thank Judith for that drive-by misdirection, but I'd love to see that in a common FAQ across all these foundations. I want to do X, I should go there. If all of the alphabet soup of foundations and orgs and code bases had a common FAQ that says you're here if you want to do this, otherwise if you want to do these other things, I'd love to see that across those
That's what the intent of the Linux Foundation Digital Trust landing page for the ones within LF. And yes, we do realize we need to expand that to the others that are, we work with every day. But we thought at least we have to make an understanding for the developers on Open Wallet. That's the whole purpose, not to build a new organization, but to build a map.
Do we have further questions, Mike?
I have one.
None. No, we're good.
So as you are undoubtedly aware, there's a substantial open wallet code initiative in Europe. How will the Open Wallet Foundation, which is based in Europe, relate to that European initiative?
I mean, you're referring to EIDAS, the European Digital Identity Wallet. I mean, basically, we are still working on that, right? Work that out. For those that are not familiar with that, EIDAS is the regulation in the European Union that is about digital identity, and it has been updated or is in process of being updated and evolves the way digital identity is done in the European Union towards decentralized identity and wallets. And this is a huge undertaking, right? Which in the end will result in all the 300 million plus citizens in the European Union to have access to wallets and digital credentials. And the European Commission has already funded development of a reference wallet application that is open source. And we are trying to cooperate because in the end, that source code needs a safe place to be maintained going forward. And the European Commission hasn't planned to provide the funding for that in the future. So it's quite natural to cooperate on that. And on top of that, they are also looking for open source to be used in EIDAS. The technical underpinnings for the European Union's digital identity wallet have been defined in the so-called architecture reference framework. And there are a couple of standards mentioned there, ISO MDL, selective disclosure JOT, and OpenID for VCs. And it would be great if at OWF there could be projects where people jointly develop code bases for that can be utilized in the European Digital Identity Wallet, but also in other places. I know there are already existing projects, mostly small projects run by individuals, for example, or companies. And I think it would be great to join forces and collectively work on those code bases.
I want to thank you all for this, listening to this quick overview of something that we think is substantial and significant. Again, OpenID Foundation is one of the charter associate members of the Open Wallet Foundation. Juliana Kafik from Microsoft and myself are the liaison persons, and obviously Torsten and many of you will be involved in trying to make sure that we can realize the potential of collaborating across the organizations that you've heard from just briefly here in the room, and you'll hear more from in the days to come. So that's the Open Wallet Foundation briefing. I'll give the microphone back to our executive director.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And if you've got an idea, just talk to Hart and myself, Daniela. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Torsten. Thank you, Don. Thanks to the OWF staff and other participants who are in the room. So clearly a lot of good action happening there. I'd like to hand over now to Elizabeth, who's going to give us an update on GAIN, the Global Assured Identity Network, which many of you have heard of since it was kicked off in, 18 months ago? 30, yeah, a while ago now.
Thank you. And Dima, you can come up too. We're actually going to start with a bit of a demo, although I'm not sure how I'm going to implement that on my own. Mike, do you know what we're doing? Thank you. So I don't know I think we have Kosuke on the line as well. So Kosuke recorded a video for us. Do you know how to make that play, Mike? Oh, okay. Let's go for it. Sound. We need the sound. I'll go back. Sorry, everybody. Dima, do you dance? No? That's too bad. Neither do I. I did go back so that we could start the sound again. Oh, that's a shame. There is words. There are words.
Can I read it out?
What's that? We could. Sorry, everyone. Why don't we just move forward with the update, and if it is possible to figure out. Okay. You want to read it? Judith says let's read it.
Out loud, or I'll read it because I just listened to it 3 times.
You go back and play it again. For those who can't see in the back of the room. So with GAIN, the idea is you can give an example. Imagine you find a billboard at the airport and scan the QR code. Then you choose and log in with your bank account.
It doesn't have to be a bank account. It could be any.
Could be other identity services. So there he is, logging in. And then you enter your credit card number. This is all to be able to purchase an eSIM as an example of a use case. And you promptly get an eSIM, a virtual SIM that you can download using a QR code and an activation code. And because your personal information was shared with OpenID Connect for identity assurance with that standard, the service provider can be sure that the information provided from your bank was verified with a sufficient process. So this would be the eSIM provider. Also with the OpenID Federation spec, service providers and banks don't have to set up connections bilaterally, obviously making it much easier to implement. This helps the GAIN network to grow quickly and easily. Hope the demo helps you. Please join the GAIN POC community group. And thanks to Kosuke for pulling this together.
Yeah, and I think he's probably on the line if we have questions directly for him afterwards. So I'm sorry about that video not working. All right, so GAIN is here to deliver on really a core tenet of many of the international guidances on how digital identity systems should work. And the idea is that we're going to help to enable global interoperability. That's going to underpin human rights. This is kind of a referral forward to my next presentation. You know, interoperability is going to underpin human rights, deliver better user experiences, delivers on national security objectives, all sorts of things, driving this purpose that we have here of connecting different trust networks and ecosystems around the world. So when we started out this project 18 months ago, as Gail said, you know, the idea was global interoperability. We wanted to be technology agnostic, build on open standards, and think internet scale. How can we build something that's going to deliver interoperability at internet scale? And to build on what's been built. But I put those asterisks here now because it's important to note that what's been built changes all the time, and we are looking to adapt and move with the times as we go. So we show this slide every time just to sort of ground ourselves. What we are looking to do is connect different trust networks or different ecosystems where trust already exists, and yeah, bridge those islands of trust. The proof of concept that Dima and I co-chair at the OpenID Foundation. Have you got your microphone and your dance moves ready?
Testing.
Okay, great. So we have been working to build and test those standards. And I'm going to let Dima talk to this slide and a couple of others.
Sure. So I think if my memory is correct, about 12 months ago, we looked at using, before OpenID Federation, 12 months ago, we looked at connecting different identity providers and reliant parties to exchange the data, looking at the data plane. So we proved that we can exchange the data between different participants across borders. The last 12 months, 6 months ago, I think we gave an update where we were looking at the ways how we can introduce the trust between different participants, how we can introduce discovery between different participants within the trusted networks connecting to each other. We separate this, conceptually we separated in 2 different planes. Control plane, which is looking at after trust management and discovery. And we're looking at data plane, which is looking at the actual data exchange. So the last 6 months, we've been working hard on profiling the specifications, OpenID Federation specification and OpenID for IDA specification, but mostly focusing on the trust aspect of it. How does the reliant party from a trusted network A can discover the IDP within trusted network B and trust it? Is that the party vetted by some governing authorities that I would accept their credentials from. So in the last, next slide. So what we've done, what we've kind of completed to date is we've set up 3 federations and connected them to each other. So we've got Italian Federation, which is actually 2 federations. One is a commercial network of IDPs in Italy, and the other one is a government network of IDPs. We've got yes.com digital identity network in Germany, and we've got Authlit Federation with Authlit IDP and KDDI Reliant Party.
And that's the demo you just saw.
That's a demo that you've seen right now. There was a connectivity between Reliant Party and IDP that KDDI recorded. So we use federation interfaces to establish trust between the networks. Some of the networks here, like Italian Federation, they're federation native. They understand OpenID Federation natively. And some of them, like yes.com, to a certain extent, Authlit Federation had to adapt to the interface. Yes, I think so. That's where we are. That's where we are right now. The next slide. The next slide, we didn't have a chance to put a more comprehensive slide, but there's quite a bit of amount of work happening right now in introducing verifiable credentials to the network. We want to enable our participants, our IDPs, to issue verifiable credentials, and we want to enable the existing verifiable credential issuers to participate in the network. That's quite active discussion at the moment, and everyone is welcome to join.
And we're looking to call a session at IIW to talk about how we do that and who wants to get involved in that. You're invited. Please join. Meanwhile, at the OIX, we have some other work going underway that's, forward thinking in its own right as well. So they've started by looking at how do they enable different trust frameworks to understand one another. And they've done that in a number of different ways and analyzed a lot of different policy characteristics of, probably 8 to 10 networks so far, or different trust frameworks. And they're also looking at what might a future look like in which a smart wallet or smart agent can interpret those policy characteristics and enable global interoperability itself. So that's the emerging conversation going on at OIX, which I'm excited to be a part of as well. And so all of this update, this says 1 year on, it's actually 18 months on. We are updating now a paper just to let everyone know what has been going on at the OpenID Foundation, at the Open Identity Exchange, even at GLIFE and the other agencies that have been supportive of the GAIN initiative, which is the Cloud Signature Consortium. I already mentioned GLIFE, Secure Identity Alliance, and I think I'm missing one other right now. I'm sorry, who is it? Judith seems to know, but she's whispering. Someone from Japan. Yeah. So yeah, I think I said all 6, but I'm not sure. So we're updating the white paper to talk about all the different work that's been going on at those agencies and how they're sort of coalescing and what the vision for the future of GAIN is going to look like. So that paper is going to be presented at EIC by me and Nick Mothershaw. And yeah, that's the GAIN update. Does anyone have any questions about what we are doing?
We'll probably send the link to a video to the online
That's a good idea.
participants. Mike, if we can.
If you want to see Kosuke's demo, you can join the OpenID Foundation GAIN POC members Slack group, and that video is available there. Judith?
Now, are you looking into how to? Oh, sorry, I forget for the people online. Sorry.
Sorry, people online. With what you're doing, it involves a mobile phone and a user interface. We could call that a wallet if you wanted to put that in the wallet. So how are you making sure that what you're doing here is aligned with other wallet development going on around the world for, say, EIDAS and for, Open Wallet Foundation, et cetera?
That's a really good question. So we are talking at the GAIN 6 level about how those organizations can participate. So the GAIN 6 being the nonprofit organizations that sort of meet on a monthly basis to talk about the future direction of this effort. And at that level, we're talking about what other organizations might join us. No announcements to be made today, I don't think. And Gail, I'm going to give you the mic in a second to see if you want to expand on this answer. But the OpenID Foundation has a liaison with the EU working groups, and we're talking to folks like Daniel Goldscheider, and Torsten is one of the other co-chairs here at the GAIN POC.
Sure. I think many of you know Daniel Goldschneider was intimately involved in setting up GAIN, and obviously is intimately involved in setting up the Open Wallet Foundation. So there's a natural fit, and the intent is for this work to be complementary, right, and additive to each other. So I believe that he is planning to take an invitation to the Open Wallet Foundation. I don't know the structure, the board, the community, and ask whether there would be a formal decision to join. There's an MOU between the different nonprofits, the G6 as we nickname them. So that would potentially make it a G7 if the Open Wallet Foundation were to agree to join, all using the same existing terms. And it's a non-binding MOU, but it does lay out very clear swim lanes for each nonprofit on what their respective contributions will be to the initiative. So that's crisp going in. And then the idea is it's a consensus basis that the other existing participants all agree, yep, that's a clear swim lane. That would be additive. That will help deliver on the vision and the mission. Big check mark. So we have a draft of that in place and just waiting for that to hopefully be formalized.
And we've got quite a bit of coverage. Different participants within GAIN participate in different standard bodies already. So we have quite a bit of coverage.
Yeah, and I mean, at least on the GAIN POC side, I'm delighted to see the momentum continue. So I don't know if we called it out, but the 38 participants, I think just over the last 2 weeks, we've had another 4 sign the participation agreement. So we continue to see momentum and engagement building on clearly the integration that Dima reviewed, and clearly lots of people who are observing and paying close attention. So I think that's good traction, and looking forward, Elizabeth, to the revised white paper to lay out where the GAIN work is now. So,
yep,
great. Okay, I think we're a wrap on this section. So we'll move on to the next one. If you could click the slide for me. We're gonna now bring you up yet again, Elizabeth, to talk about one of your other hats here, the OIDF Government Identity White Paper that you've been lead editing with Mark Hain. And as I mentioned at the kickoff here, we did have a listening session last year, and you shared the approach you're going to take. Love to hear your process and where you are to get to publishing the first draft in the next couple weeks.
Thank you. I'm back. Okay, so the Government Identity White Paper, this is a humbling undertaking, I'm going to say. So the idea behind this is to provide a kind of resource for any government official looking to implement, strategize around a digital identity solution or system. And obviously this is a very, very big question, a very big space. And one of the first questions that I was asking myself is like, well, obviously, who am I to offer such advice? And what does success look like? And so for me, it was important to ground the paper in what is the purpose of a government, and how does a digital ID solution help deliver on that purpose? So we've chosen to ground the paper in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and ensure that when we're talking and making recommendations that we're thinking about it on those terms rather than any other, method of determining what is good and what is bad. We can all sign up to, I hope, the UN Declaration on Human Rights. And when you look at it from that perspective, there's a lot of literature out there that speaks to the promise of digital ID and digital identity ecosystems. So like the Key to Inclusive Growth and many, many other papers, building on what is the promise and the potential of digital ID solutions. But there are also, moments in history that are dark, and there are also many pieces of literature out there that speak to the risks and the negative effects of potentially implementing the wrong thing. So we've done a very, very comprehensive review of as much of the literature as we can in building the paper as it stands today. So we have looked at everything from ID 2020, from ID4D, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the digital identity issue analysis that Consult Hyperion built a few years ago. That was really, really comprehensive and good. And even the recent OECD recommendations. So we're trying to say something here that is unifying and that is additive to a conversation that already has a lot of voices, right? And so that's a particularly big challenge. But this is where we started with the human rights, the Bill of Human Rights at the UN, and we started with a lot of reading and talking to a lot of people with amazing experiences and things to say on this subject. In particular, we tried to break down what are the types of ID solutions, you know, in the simplest way that we could without oversimplifying. What are the different kinds of solutions that exist out there today, from, you know, your standard state issued EID on a smart card, those with centralized biometrics, and not all the way to what is happening in Bhutan and in the European Union with a more self-sovereign implementation. And we've also looked at archetypes for the governance systems as well. I am sure some of you are sitting here looking at this chart and these flags, and if you know what the flags are, saying you've got some of that wrong. And I would love to talk to you about it because we're not out there. It's not a finished product yet, but this is the kind of process that we're taking to lay these out, to analyze the architectures and to analyze the governance systems and speak to sort of the risks, the threats, the mitigating strategies, and the trade-offs in any one of these. So what are our high-level insights? Look, Mike, the builds did work. Isn't that amazing? We thought this wasn't going to build. So one of the key takeaways from all the research was that we want governments to go out there and make sure that they have a national level holistic strategy when it comes to digital ID ecosystems, because there are so many tremendous complexities as it relates to the systems themselves, the governance structures, and the implications that they have for people. So that's an obvious one. We want to promote human-centered design processes that promote the individual as well as the establishment and maintenance and revocation and ending of a relationship, an ID relationship. So that's another recommendation in the paper. We're also recommending that that governments in the process of developing their national level strategies do a lot of community engagement and outreach because that's how you build trust and how you ensure that your system is truly human-centered. Interoperability, identity ecosystems, they maximize benefits to everyone when they are interoperable, both between government systems themselves, between government and private services, and also internationally. But of course, need to have constraints to what can be shared with whom and when. We are recommending that governments support the maturation of standards in whatever ways that they can by getting involved in organizations such as the ones in the room here today and by implementing and testing these things. We are also recommending that the tools and rules evolve together so that we're not rushing in and implementing technology solutions without first ensuring that we have a governance system and institutional safeguards in place. Institutional protections, again, it's related to the tools and rules point. And then trust establishment at scale remains a real, for multi-parties, remains a meaningful and unsolved problem. So this is where our literature review got us. And you're probably thinking like this isn't really new. This is stuff that's all been said before, and you're right. And we are especially impressed with the breadth of the recommendations that the OECD just put out in their draft paper, and we really endorse them, and we want to support them and promote them and add to the discussion about them. So they're really, all the things on that previous slide are kind of covered in the OECD recommendations, and they're kind of oriented around these three themes of developing holistic national level strategies, human-centric design, and interoperability. They're kind of organized differently to how I just laid them out, but they're all in there. And so our paper is really going to be building upon those parts of that conversation, endorsing these principles and speaking more and more specifically about them. So the paper kind of culminates in a recommendation at the moment, or in a set of recommendations that really just are a unified set of recommendations from ID 2020, ID for D, DIAC, and the Human Trust Foundation's report, as well as the OECD, which really covers almost everything. So we're going to be doing, let me see, what have I not said? So just some more granular level feedback to the OECD about things like institutional support and governance frameworks. We're going to speak to the development and the maturation of standards, and then some more specific things around privacy, security, allowance for multiple personas, and certain sort of edge cases. We're just going to expand on that a little bit more, even though they're kind of already covered in those recommendations. And this is where we're going. The paper at the moment, it's not finished, it's not finalized. And I think I would love to take more feedback from you about what you've heard and whether it's useful and whether it's additive to the conversation, like I said, with many voices. And so I'm going to stop talking now and invite your thoughts. Yes, John.
Waiting for the mic. Thanks, Elizabeth. So it's a question because like in my day job, I do enterprise consulting with large enterprises that work globally. And in my space, you can't do that without butting into regulations or cultural attitudes or things that are directly contradictory to each other. So when you talk about interoperability and holistic and community engagement, have you started to figure out how you're going to address those kind of contradictions? My favorite example is between two democracies like Canada and Finland. I'm Canadian, I spent time in Finland. In Finland, your tax filings are public. Not the whole thing, but if your neighbor wants to know how much you make and what your tax, that's a matter of public knowledge. In Canada, that would be a horrifying privacy invasion. Both democracies, both well respected, but fundamentally different on something like that. So have you started to figure out how you're going to recommend that human-centered or human beneficial, I prefer, interoperability deals with that kind of question?
I have not, as you can tell by my face. No, I think that's a really, really important point. And it's one that, Dyack points out. One size doesn't fit all, even within a population, one size
Wasn't going to go there.
doesn't fit all. But I think in the process of developing ID systems that do work inside one country, you learn what these cultural factors are that need to inform the design of your ecosystems. And then it's important to build operability with respect to those boundaries, right? You don't. I think the constraints of the system are equally important as what you're opening up, right? I don't know. It's definitely something to think about, and I don't have the answer. I see movement of microphones, so. Okay.
Hi, I haven't read through the paper, but I was curious as to how you're kind of addressing unintended consequences, biases, collection of, large amounts of biometric data, the buzzword of the, right now, artificial intelligence, all of uses of those types of things. How are you kind of addressing those unintended consequences and how government should address those?
So the paper does a lot of calling out the potential for unintended consequences without necessarily demonizing any one decision, but sort of, I think that it's important not to demonize the decisions that are being made in other countries. So I don't want this paper to be steeped in my Anglo-American bias, but I do want it to be steeped in respect for human rights. And that's why we called that out at the beginning. I think it's critically important that we reframe the human rights agenda. And I have citations for my statement right now. These are not my thoughts, my unique original thoughts. But I think it's really important that we reframe the human rights agenda for the digital age and for these emerging technologies. And we say, what do these international Bill of Rights covenants that 137 nations, 172 nations have signed up to one of them. What do these statements mean in this new age? And then how does that reflect in our digital ID ecosystems as well as our other technologies? That is a key recommendation in the paper. And the author I'm thinking of is Elizabeth Ranieris, and I think she used to be on the board of some of the institutions here, but she's done an amazing book about it that I'll promote. It's called Beyond Data. And I think that it just gives you a lot to think about and unpack. Thank you for asking that question.
So I just wanted to build on that a little bit around the idea of privacy. I don't know. I'm not familiar with I should be, the human rights side of this, and whether that's built into it. But there's in terms of correlation of incentives, there's a strong incentive to try to correlate transactions and so on, where the individuals about whom that data is, the individuals about that do those transactions may not want that to happen. Is that something you're touching on in this?
I mean, I might say like Heather's going to touch on that in more depth, I think. Yeah, we touch on that in the paper. We talk, and it's touched upon especially in the OECD rules, but the non-correlation and placing limits on.
You should hit the unmute button on the Teams.
So thank you for distilling the literature. Thank you for helping to frame it. And hopefully it's going to be meaningful in the conversations the OpenID Foundation is taking part in at the OECD, as well as ID for Africa coming up around the corner. It's not as if the EU or India or the US, we all have the exact right answer, and it's going to work for everyone globally, and it's going to look exactly the same in every jurisdiction. So I think this kind of thought work is critical. We also had determined at the board that it would be useful to do a deep dive into privacy. And so Heather maybe took on another thankless task of looking at the literature around privacy and digital identity, particularly for government issued identity credentials, and has really dove very deep into that and has shared her draft document online already. And she'll give us an overview. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you very much. All right, so how many people have actually seen the paper? Awesome. How many of you saw it and then ran away because it's really, really long? All right, you'll get there, trust me. Because the paper is in fact very, very long. Why is that? Because what I was aiming for is a paper that is definitely global in scope, because I don't think, there's no one jurisdiction that's going to do this absolutely correctly. I wanted to see, what is the privacy landscape around government issued digital credentials on a really large scale? Well, that's when you're going to go look at the Aadhaar network in India. What about where it's entirely ubiquitous in the population? That's when you're going to look at Singapore. What about something that is, held up as an interesting model for the whole world to follow and kind of acts on a, you'll forgive the use of the word federated, please, federated model of what the European Union is doing. For that matter, there's the United States that doesn't entirely know what it's doing yet, but by golly, each state's going to figure it out individually, and then we'll see if it all works together. Starting with that, that's already a pretty big scope. But then the question is, well, who's your target audience? Who do you expect to read the paper? Well, I'm trying to get several different stakeholder groups up to the same baseline. I'm looking for the government policymakers to be reading this and having a better understanding of what's happening in the technology and standard space. I'm hoping that civil society that's acting behind the scenes to to lobby for change, to influence change, to understand, a bit more on both sides of what's happening both in the government sector and what's happening with technology. And I'd like the technologists and the folks that are working on standards to see how what they're doing is being implemented today. It's a lot of people to try and talk to in a single paper. There were many people that actually helped out with this in terms of offering input, reviewing early copies, giving me quite a bit of feedback on the early copies. And several organizations have already signed on saying, yes, they think this is a darn good start. This list may grow, but some organizations really want to see where we end up with it before they put their name on it. Okay, so you'll be happy to know I'm not going to talk about the first 2/3 of the paper. If you'd like to see that, go read it. I'm told it's a pretty good overview of the landscape. I'm diving straight into the recommendations, in part because for some of these, I would like your feedback. I'm not 100% convinced on some of these recommendations. They are bunched into sections. Now, it was interesting to me, for some of the folks who did an early review, they said, I think you should be more provocative. I think you should really go out there with these recommendations. And I thought about that. And I decided I wasn't terribly comfortable with it. And that's partly because there are so many basics that I felt the need to say, globally, these are areas of difficulty. These are areas of tension. These are the gaps where stuff isn't working well that just need to be resolved regardless. Now, you put in provocative material when you want to sort of drag your long tail with you. I don't think the long tail is ready to be dragged yet. If you do it too soon, you don't drag them, you break the chain, and they say, what, this is just too hard, I give up, I'm going home. And that's not the message we want to send. So there are the back to basics to get to. The motherhood and apple pie of, the individual should have agency. They should have the opportunity to make their choices in an informed fashion without cognitive overload. It's very important that you give them choice, and it's very important that you don't give them so much choice that they just start clicking the button frantically to make you go away. There's the next point of, yes, this should be obvious, making sure that there's transparency in the system, that the parties involved, you actually know what they're doing with the data, why they're collecting the data, that you've got this information, you can find it out, it is discoverable. Data minimization. This has been such a basic security principle for so long. It's actually a little bit sad making that it has to be on the recommendation list of no. The best way to preserve privacy in a system is to not have the data in the first place. And it amused me greatly to put on a back to basics slides, advanced cryptography. Yes, that is your basic thing. That's partly because cryptography is basic. When you're looking at the security of digital credentials, you're talking about encryption. And the things that we need to do to make sure that the credentials are being served in a privacy enhancing manner is you've got to have some pretty smart encryption involved for the most part, so that you're only disclosing what you want to disclose while still protecting the rest of the data. And that involves a pretty extensive conversation between a lot of parties, from operating system developers to mathematicians, all of the above. So one of the questions I have out of the recommendations in here, so each section dives into some more very specific details, which if you've read the paper, you will know what they are. But one of them that I was a little dubious about was under data minimization. And that was a suggestion that the relying parties for government issued digital credentials should be registered as, yes, they are certified that this is the type of information that they are allowed to have because they've jumped through the correct hoops to be awarded, given access to a certain amount of data. There's a certain centralization of permission that is on this list, and that I personally feel like there's a lot of miracles must occur in order for that to be a thing. I can understand why we would want to do it. You do want to have some oversight to say, all right, these are some of the highest value credentials in the world. And if you want to protect the people that these credentials live with, you need to have some level of oversight. But what does that oversight have to look like? I don't know. That centralized model is certainly one way to do it. The decentralized people among us, of which there are many, will almost certainly say, no, bad model, no biscuit. And yet, I don't trust my mother to make good decisions necessarily, and I would like her to have a little bit more help. So I want to talk about that. And if you've got some thoughts on the matter, drop me an email or send it to director@openid.net, because I want that input into my paper. Okay, so that was your back to basics, but now there are some topics in the space of privacy and in the space of digital credentials that you can't avoid, because these are the ongoing concerns. If you start to do a web search and just say, I want to know about government issued digital credentials, these are some of the topics that are just going to pop right up. Top of the list, without a doubt, is concerns about surveillance. And that's a concern that you can't gloss over. You can't ignore it. You have to come up with some recommendations, some direction, some transparency to say, how is that government not going to be collecting data about its people? And how can they avoid collecting the data about those people? They've got a bit of a catch-22 here in terms of they need to know what's going on so that they can protect people from bad behavior, right? But that means they have to be watching for bad behavior. I'm not entirely sure how they can win. Another area of ongoing concern. You can't be looking in this space without people starting to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Frankly, that needs its own paper. I did not cover that in depth because that topic is ginormous. And yet, a lot of the topics there are the topics of privacy. And so making sure that when you're developing these credential systems and when you are thinking about privacy, what you're doing is you need to be building in the equity and inclusion into your systems for all sorts of good reasons. And that's almost an obvious recommendation to make, but it has to be there. Another area of ongoing concern comes back to the topic of centralization. There are reasons that governments will do this, that want to do this, that they feel like they need to do this. But in doing that, they're creating these yummy, yummy, tasty collections of data. Look at all those biometric data in that big database. Isn't that just a fun target? The number of systems out there that do provide, that hold this central amount of data, this single point of failure in the system is terrifying. So, I've got some thoughts about that maybe that's not a terribly good idea. Or if you're going to do it, biometrics being a marvelous example, make sure that you're doing biohashing on the data. That was a topic I learned about only in doing the research for this paper, the fact that biohashing is a thing, such that if you, just like with your password, they don't store the plain text of your password. They're not supposed to store the equivalent plain text of your biometrics. They're supposed to hash it so that if you need to change something because of a database compromise, you can. Otherwise, you can't quite change your face, and that's a little bit of a problem these days. The inappropriate use by legitimate actors, that, in a way that's the same as surveillance, but it's bigger, right? It is talking about, in some ways, governments, and the fact that governments are like any large corporation. They're not a single entity. There are agencies, there are departments, there's a whole lot going on there, and that one agency may be responsible for holding the data, issuing the credentials, and another agency entirely may be that relying party that's collecting the data and doing who knows what with it. Similarly, the relying parties, they may be registered in the system, however that's going to happen, but are they correlating data? Are they collecting data beyond what they should be doing? These kinds of things are ongoing concerns in the space that absolutely have to be addressed for these systems to actually be considered privacy enhancing systems. And one topic that really jumped out to me, and it might be because I'm an American that's lived through a couple of fascinating administrations in the last 10 years. That is when you, so let's say, for argument's sake, you had the administration has set up some marvelous privacy protections. They've done a great job. Wonderful. Couldn't be better. And the next administration comes in and says, I never liked those anyway. You know what, we're just going to take those out. We're going to declare them unconstitutional. We're going to put all sorts of exceptions in. You know, this ping pong game of what an administration can do with the laws is really concerning. And so this is an area where some of the non-governmental organizations can come in and probably do a lot more to make it less of a national level thing and add a little bit more in the way of international treaties, because there's this marvelous fiction in the world, and that's that geopolitical boundaries like are hard and they exist and people don't travel and the internet is global and people do travel and these systems do need to interoperate. So there's certainly room for a little bit more in the way of international agreement that will try and buffer some of the sustainable connections that have to happen over time with making sure that these systems stay private the way they should. All right, this one was fun, the emerging concerns, because these were some areas that as I was doing my research, I'm like, you know what? These are going to be huge problems. I don't necessarily have recommendations for them other than people who are much smarter than me, and I'm looking at you now. We need to be worried about this. Digital warfare is definitely a growing thing, and there's some fascinating papers out there about it these days. And the fact that private sector technology is increasingly used by military suggests that digital warfare is going to be a huge impact on credential systems like government-issued digital credentials. And as you start depending on those for actual services, they become interesting targets of attack. You're going to have to like build in the privacy protections at such a foundational level that that they can't be ripped out, they can't be changed, they can't be compromised, despite what the military might want, because the military might want those back doors so that they can and they can address, you know, they can get in the system to do what they need to do. It's an interesting problem. Don't know how to resolve it, but we have to watch for it. Similarly, deepfakes. Deepfakes are proving to be another great and interesting area of when you get one computer to actually fool another one based on just how well done the fake is. Given how much we're talking about online and given how much we're talking about with interesting biometric data, what will a deepfake do in that scenario? Because we're not that far off where instead of being able to do you know, password stuffing, hey, let's do a deep fake stuffing. That would be fun and probably quite possible in a very short period of time. All right, civil society members, I have a mission for you. And that is the fact that you've got some serious expertise in the world of privacy. You have studied this greatly, but one of the things I've observed is that most, not all, but most civil society members focus on the government. They focus on law. They very much have that legal perspective, and that's important. But it would be really nice if they turn their attention a little bit to understanding what the technology is and is not capable of, and actually providing some guidance and some input, and collecting guidance and input in terms of what can the technology do, such that civil society can serve as a much better bridge between the government sector and the technologists. That I see has been a big gap over time that it's closable, and I think I really wish it would happen. So, the white paper, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to actually go read that paper. The comment period is open, I believe, until, what did I say? 24th, the April 24th. The reason for that deadline is because I will be presenting at EIC on this paper, and the paper will be done by then. So it will be done by then. And then I'm going to be presenting again at Identiverse on my birthday. It will be wonderful. I expect there to be singing at that session. So yes, the paper will be done at that point. So if you have any thoughts, any feedback, I am here through IIW. I'm here today at breaks. You can send me email if you want to set up a call for next week and just chat about it. I would love to do that. And in the meantime, there's the link. And thank you very much. If there are, I don't know if we want to take questions or how are we doing on time?
3 minutes, 4 minutes?
3 minutes.
Online or in the room?
Hi, I have a comment, and I think this may fall under the digital warfare area, but it may fall under other sort of emerging concerns as well. But have you like looked at problems involved with people just saving data that has been encrypted in massive data stores and then doing cryptanalysis on it at a later date when, say, quantum computers help us do things that we can't do today? Is that something that is a concern?
Is it a concern? Yes. Have I personally found evidence of it in the literature? No. Does that mean it doesn't exist? Certainly not. But I think it's at a point where we won't know yet, because you're right. I'm sure they've got a copy, and I'm sure they're storing it, but they can't decrypt it yet. So wait for it.
That we know of.
That we know of.
Can you define civil society? Like, I'm not sure who the members of civil society are exactly.
Civil society are the IIPPs of the world. They are those folks that sit in the middle, focusing on specific issues that will inform legislation, that will inform regulation, things like that.
So
the EFF would be another fine and dandy example.
Okay, so foundation members who are focusing on privacy, is that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Just waiting because I'm leading a civil society group.
I want Nat right there to be focused on that, and I'm sure he is.
So a question, what's the best way?
So what's the best way for the folks to provide their comments to the paper?
So if you go to that website, there's there's a link to the paper, and then there's the director at OpenID.net. What I'm doing is I'm collecting like all of the comments, putting them in a spreadsheet, and making sure that I'm addressing every single one that I can, trying to make it actually a proper disposal of comments scenario. Okay, I think that brings us to time. I think that brings us to break. Ha, brilliant.
Thank you. Certainly accolades to Heather for her vigorous work to understand the literature and to try and frame such a complex topic, and clearly one that's so important to all of us, right? And so nuanced depending on the jurisdiction. So another thankless task, another great piece of work. And what the board hoped to do in the first place was even attempt to take a stab at these really difficult topics. And by having thoughtful lead editors and the combined effort of other nonprofits contributing, and obviously the members and the general public, that they could serve as a form of lightning rod to gather the community's feedback, to really distill down what we think the key issues are, and to help government officials largely, as well as civil society, to use this as a litmus test to kind of temperature check their implementations, to temperature check where the gaps can be in the approaches that they're taking, and obviously the policies that they're trying to create in real time. So it seems like this is very timely work. I know there's at least 5 different organizations seriously considering, adding their name to the paper, and we warmly encourage that. It's certainly not just an OpenID Foundation paper. It's likely to be multi-entity branded when it really comes down to it, and we just want to help spur on that conversation and make sure we drive that analysis. So thank you to you both and to Mark for your lead editorship. We're now at the break. We've got about 5-10 minutes for you to have a bio break. For those in the room, just down the hall, you'll see some restrooms and, of course, some drinks and snacks in the back. We'll resume in about 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you.
wanted to, I just wanted to. Yeah, that's awesome. I've never.
Oh, yes.
What I think by relying on Right, so. Yes. I was trying to ask you something exact. Yeah, it's the data. Yes. And now
So my suggestion would be one of these particular scenes, not for anybody after you might have been. Or one version, but you see that right now, we can switch for you'll find a difference, like make sure. And we could mix it up. And we could be adjusted or dressing that with some slides that using was as a judge of the it's things within the journey, and then there is a company you can adjust the character, say name of character, and so they synchronize with him since I make it like and then I just on one of the characters so it shows some well, I mean, that's like the word first. Well, but so the thing is that's a free yeah, right now, And but they may have even so they Time to go in. So I contact that. You've been around for 7 years, now and
Can everybody in the room, please? We are going to reassemble.
Let's take our seat so we can get started.
If you want to start yeah, but yes.
Okay, folks, yet again, technical difficulties, so I can't advance the slides. So we'll just pause for a moment until we can begin the working group update. It's not something I'll remember, so we need to find somebody who has a card. Does anyone have the Wi-Fi card to share to the member? The little Wi-Fi cards that I handed out? Sure. Thank you, Don.
So I can see.
If anyone else needs the Wi-Fi, I'll put it by the snacks.
I thought that was the only. That's why that's. Oh, you can. Now's the time that it doesn't fast charge. It doesn't want it. So that was the so they came us later. Yeah. If you don't know communication. It didn't make it. Some people would actually very like RPs, user data.
All right, we are ready to kick off again. Thank you for the understanding for our second technical delay. Hopefully that's our last one for the afternoon. We're now going to go into the OpenID Connect working group update by Mike Jones, and you'll see he's going to kick off with a template we'll use for each of the working groups to let you know what it's about and next steps in the next few days. And if there is anything at IIW that you need to discuss, Mike, hopefully you'll raise that at the end.
Is there a place I should stand for a camera, or are we just audio? Okay. Welcome back after our break. I'm Mike Jones. I'm one of the chairs of the OpenID Connect working group and a contributor. And we will talk about our working group for a little bit. So, the Connect working group is one of the oldest in the foundation. We've produced a lot of things. We're still producing a lot of things that matter. They came up with this nifty template that we, as working group presenters, now get to fill in to provide some consistency and to help us corral our thoughts. So this is the first dry run of this. So, we published OpenID Connect, which is used by a huge number of the authentications worldwide. We're doing the federation work. We incubated some work that's gone to other working groups. The eKYC IDA working group formed initially out of some work that was started in Connect. And you can go to the working group status page to see a whole bunch of specs as well as commentary on what their status is and what they do. And we've finished a bunch of stuff. On the next slide, I'll talk about having finished some more stuff since we last met our heroes. We also have important stuff under development. I mean, some of the active work includes the Federation work that was talked about in the GAIN presentation. There's a family of OpenID for verifiable credential specs, which I will intentionally not talk much about because some of the contributors there will have a presentation directly about that. And a number of other things that are in flight. So, progress and opportunities. Since we last met our heroes in November, we finished some things. I like to finish things. We finished the unmet authentication requirements specification, which Torsten was primary author on and had a business need for. It's a little thing. It does one thing well, and it's done. We finished the native SSO for mobile apps, which George Fletcher was primary editor on. We have published an implementer's draft of the, we finished initiating user registration, the prompt create. We published an implementer's draft of the native SSO, and there's conversations in the working group about whether to take that forward. I think Okta has some feedback on it. So that's a work in progress. We may do some things with that. We published a few weeks ago proposed second implementer's draft of the OpenID for VP spec. And now all of you have something to do right now. Go to that URL and vote to approve the spec or not. You can abstain, you can object, but we really need participation to reach quorum. So while I continue talking with you, type that URL in. And as a bonus, if you're not already an OpenID Foundation member or your membership isn't current, when you try to sign in, this will let you join and you can then participate in the vote. Individual memberships are still only $50. We've published multiple OpenID Connect Federation drafts in the intervening half year, multiple OpenID for VC drafts. Work progresses. We have many calls, many of you come. The template included describe challenges and opportunities facing the working group. I think that's good. An opportunity, we have the OpenID Connect Federation in production use in Italy for not one, but two national federations. There's discussions, some of which you've already heard about expanding the trust models usable by federation, motivated in part by GAIN and some of the other use cases, federating existing deployments of OpenID Connect. You know, the whole digital wallet space is becoming a thing, and it's probably a thing that's going to matter. Some of this work intersects with that, and some of the people intersect. And finally, we have threatened to submit the OpenID Connect specs to ISO for what's called publicly available specification status. That lets those with treaty-based procurement regimes, often in other countries, choose to use those ISO specs based on the Connect specs. So lots happening. So here's a few things we may choose to do in the next coming months. We are actively working towards a new Federation implementers draft, again, after we broaden the trust models to include WebPKI. What do I mean by that? WebPKI are all those TLS certificates. If you use, Tobias nods, if you use .wellknown/OpenID configuration to get metadata about your Connect implementation. You are using WebPKI. You are trusting the integrity of the data and that it's not forgeable because of the TLS connection to that website. Whereas there's people here in the room, Nicole and others, who can attest that in the research and education community, particularly for SAML2 federations, they have eschewed trust on WebPKI and instead sign all their own metadata using their own keys. And indeed, that's the model that the federation spec encompasses to date. We have enough people with enough use cases to also use WebPKI and give people a choice. While we're not going to break anything that exists or the ability to sign your own metadata, there's been a decision among the editors in consultation with others. John is the puppet master. To expand the trust model. So that's an aspiration. You know, Connect has been around for almost 10 years. And one of the things we're going to try to do in the next year is have a sequence of celebrations, including distinguished lectures and invited talks at major industry events, hoping to roll one out at an OpenID Foundation Japan workshop later this year. Those of you who might be organizing it, talk to me. As well as EIC and Identiverse next year. And, you know, aspirationally, we'd like to take the Federation spec to final after we continue expanding its usability. It is practically the case, again, having to do with procurement, that having a final spec will accelerate the ability for some parties to deploy. Many are reluctant to take a dependence on something that's still potentially a moving target. All right, final slide for me. What do we want to accomplish at IAW this week? Well, I'm actually going to turn the question around to you. Mike Les, do you have a second microphone to scuttle around with, or to shuttle around with? What sessions do any of you here in the room plan to run at IAW that is pertinent to some of the Connect work?
Well, I think there'll be a bunch of sessions between Torsten, Christina, and I on the OpenID for VC-related specifications. So look out for them. They're obviously work items of this working group.
Thank you, Tobias.
Hey, and we are planning also to run a session on key and trust management for verified credentials, where we will also be talking how OpenID Federation can be utilized in that context.
Very cool. Thank you. Torsten?
I'll do a session on how to do wallet attestations and device binding with OpenID for verifiable credential issuance.
Thank you, Paul. And you don't necessarily have to say this in the mic, but also be thinking about what hallway and table conversations you want to have to help move the work forward. One of the things that IIW has been important to the Connect working group and work is that it is a place where we can have the in-person huddles about things that we want to get done and working on doing it together. Okay, this morning I sent a message canceling the call that would have been at 4 o'clock. That seemed like it wasn't going to be well attended. For those who would normally be on the Thursday calls at 7 and 8 a.m. Pacific time, do we want to hold those or do we want to not hold them?
I'm in favor of canceling them. No, cancel it.
Okay, you can get up.
And we could do a hybrid thing. We could cancel the connect call and keep the SIOP call if we want to. All right, I'll gather more data, talking to you in person. That's what I have to say about our Connect working group. Are there any questions or other inputs people would like to give before I sit down?
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. Appreciate it. Always a hive of activity in those calls. Happy to welcome now Christina Yasuda and Torsten Latterstedt to talk about, talk about OpenID for verifiable credentials and continue the conversation.
Thanks, Gail. Hi, everyone. We're going to be presenting about OpenID for verifiable credentials topic. So, the bigger topic. First slide, the overview. The point of the work is develop and publish credential exchange protocols for this new issuer holder verifier model. Some call it decentralized identity, essentially the model where users not just redirected, but can present the credential directly to the verifier. There are now 5 big specifications developed. One is OpenID for verifiable presentations. That's a protocol used to present credentials between the holder/wallet to the verifier. And then OpenID for verifiable credential issuance. That's a protocol to issue credentials from the issuers into the wallet/holder. And then self-issued OP is between the wallet and the verifier, but it's more about authentication, having a user-assigned identifier to be used for a continuous relationship between the wallet and the verifier. So pseudonymous identification could be called. And then there are 2 new specs, which we haven't touched on before today's presentation. One is trust and security for OpenID for VC. So that's a whole analysis about this issuer holder verifier model. It goes pretty deep into, so far we've said we are extending OAuth and OpenID Connect for these top 3 specifications. And always a question has been, okay, great, you say you're leveraging all existing OAuth security, but is it actually true? So this document partially attempts to answer those questions. So the first step of, the systematic analysis has been completed, mainly by Daniel Fett. And then now the formal security analysis has started. There's some funding from Verimi. It's being done by a PhD student in the Stuttgart University.
May I add something?
Yeah.
So I think what's also important is, since we now have a protocol family where the different protocols are interrelated, it's important to document the trust model. So this document also documents why a verifier, for example, does not need to authenticate the wallet, because implicitly it trusts the verifier, the issuer, to do so in the course of the issue. And so that's a very important assumption underlying the protocol design, and we document that in this document. So there is a trust model in it, and based on that, there's an overall security analysis.
Yep, and the last new addition is OpenID for verifiable presentations over BLE. And whenever we present OpenID for VP work, we have been receiving question, okay, great, we can do it over the internet, but what about offline scenario? There's no internet connection. So this attempts to answer that question. Yeah, so
it not just attempts to do so, we're also going to demonstrate the first implementation that was done by MOSIP. So we can show how the credential is presented via Bluetooth Low Energy connection between an Android and iOS device, for example. So we will have a demo table on Wednesday, I think. Yeah.
On Wednesday. Yeah.
Yeah, to show a couple of demos, and VP over Bluetooth Low Energy will be one of the demos.
So yeah, all of these specs, OpenID for VP, VCI, SIOP, over BLE, all of them have running implementations. So come talk to us, happy to show. One important update, OpenID for VP, the early voting for the second implementers draft starts today. It started, I saw an announcement. So please vote. Official voting is next week. So if everything goes well, hopefully we'll have a second implementer draft in 2 weeks or so. And then just to give a certainty, I think there's a slide on it too, but after the second implementers draft, because we've been focusing on that one so far, we are planning to take the issuance draft to the first implementers draft because there are a lot of implementations emerging which need IPR protection, and also take SIOP v2 to the second implementers draft. So that's the plan right now. And for all of these, we're starting with again opening for VP wallet side, but the conversation on the conformance tests, you know how Connect Core has a self-conformance testing. The idea is to have something very similar for opening for VP, VCI, and SIOP, but we're starting with for VP, and that has been in conversation with the implementers as well.
Christina, what is BLE?
Bluetooth, sorry.
Bluetooth Low Energy.
Thanks, everyone. So yeah, since last workshop in November, European Union's EIDAS architecture and reference framework has been announced, and it explicitly mentions OpenID for VP, OpenID for VCI, and SIOP v2. And it's mandatory for PID profile of ARF. And then again, as we already said, they work on security analysis.
Just wait a moment, please.
Sorry? Oh.
Just wait a moment. That means
Oh.
a whole jurisdiction decided with 330 million citizens to adopt our specifications for building their wallet infrastructure. That's huge. And I would like to thank all people that supported us in our work. I mean, this work, as many of the other stuff, started here at IAW, right? So I can remember the first sessions we had 2 years ago or something like that when we were still virtual, right? So that all happened here, and it's really great to see this really fast adoption. And ISO is a similar story. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, let me do it again. Yeah, European Union has adopted OpenID for VC specifications. Because I know Torsten's gonna tell me I didn't take enough pause, you know. Yeah, so.
Complaining that I'm not excited.
That's how we work, you know. Yeah, so there's security analysis work happening, as you already mentioned. There's a Bluetooth work happening. Right now, the main contributor is MOSIP. MOSIPs mainly provide identity solutions for the government in the developing world, India, Philippines. They have a huge adoption there. So it's pretty exciting that, you know, they are building it. And then in order to take OpenID for VP to the second implementers draft, there are a couple of significant improvements. So one is we explicitly stated how JARM can be used with OpenID for VP, and that means now response can be signed and or encrypted. So JARM alone doesn't allow only encrypted responses, but that is currently extended to be allowed in OpenID for VP. So because VP token is already signed, you can only encrypt on top of it using JARM. And then we extended direct post, which is where response is sent using HTTPS post, to be able to continue that direct post using redirects. So the flow can continue after the wallet sends HTTPS post to the verifier with requested credentials. The flow can continue with a redirect to the original verifier, which is a pretty significant improvement in the UI UX. And we also added client identifier schemes to be able to express different trust mechanisms between the wallet and the verifier, meaning as ecosystem develops, there's been a lot of different jurisdictions, different use cases require different level of trust, different level of how do I know I can trust this verifier, how do I know I can trust this wallet, and there have been multiple mechanisms emerging. So we introduced a switch that would easily allow wallets to understand which trust framework is being discussed. And yeah, the security and implementation considerations are significantly improved, especially for this direct post. We spent a lot of time on how to secure, how to make sure this interplay between the verifier's front end and the verifier's back end, because essentially verifier back end is receiving the data, but then you're allowing the user to continue as a verifier front end. So that security part has been a big improvement. Just do my slide. Okay. So yes, in addition to EU EIDAS work that we already touched upon, there's also NIST NCCOC. I think it stands for Cyber Security Center of Excellence. So as mentioned, in the current draft of MDocs over the internet, OpenID for VP is one of the options to send MDocs. And NIST is building the reference implementation for that. So they have a plan to build implementation of OpenID for VP with MDocs. It's in their plan. I think the timeline is May, early May or something.
And we should.
End of April.
Implementers to apply to be the selected implementation. So they'll have 10 use cases and a couple of them will be OIDC for VP.
Do the same.
Sorry, real quick. NIST, with the work led by Ketan Mehta, who's a member of the ISO 18013-7 working group, they are facilitating 10 different use cases. They requested feedback from the community that ended at the end of March, and they're requesting implementers to be thinking about the use cases or the implementations they have that would map to the 10 use cases they'd like to test. And they'll be requesting submissions around the end of April or early May for any implementers who'd like to take part and to be potentially selected for that. So certainly a great opportunity for members of the OpenID Foundation community and our partner organizations to make sure they're submitting to take part in that work and to serve as reference applications.
Thank you. So yeah, we're in the process of finalizing a liaison with the European Commission to be able to directly talk about how OpenID for VC is coming into play with European Digital Identity Wallet under EIDAS V2 revision. So yeah, the Bluetooth part, we see it as an opportunity, but we do need more contributors. We do need more people with expertise. So that's, if you're interested, come talk to us. And last but not the least, there is proposal in Chromium/Android to deprecate certain custom URL schemes as a way to invoke wallets. Currently, they are mdoc-OpenID for VP. So working with our Google colleagues to figure out what's the way forward there.
Okay, Jay, just quickly mapping that on a timeline. So we are focusing on getting all the core specifications for presentation issuance and authentication through implementers draft as quickly as we can. We need support. We need help to do the reviews, to do the PRs, and so on. And we would also like to provide conformance tests for all those specifications. Those implementers drafts shall serve as a basis for references by the European Union as well as our ISO. So they are the baseline going forward. And then we've got the security and trust and the BLE stuff, and we're going to work on that. But first of all, we will do the review for adoption for the security and trust document. So we need reviewers here as well, and the review of the BLE spec. So if you are an expert in Bluetooth Low Energy, please give it a read, give us feedback on the direction and what we need to improve. And then, as already mentioned, we've got the formal security analysis conducted for the VP and the VCI spec because SIOP was already analyzed last year. So we are now focusing on the credential exchange. And what I think will eat up much of our energy this year will be the support of those key projects. So European Union's EIDAS, and also the NCCOE project going on here in the US. They will be very important. We will get more feedback. We already have gotten tremendous feedback from implementers that we need to incorporate into our specifications. That's what we're going to do this year, beside our day jobs. Okay, next slide, please. All right, there are a lot of ideas about sessions that we're going to do at IIW. To start with, we will go OpenID for VC 101. It will be more extensive than what we've shown you here. And then we've planned a couple of meetings. So we want to, and it's not going to be side meetings, it's going to be sessions. So we want to present our ideas for the roadmap of OpenID for VC and want to get a feedback of the community to our ideas regarding the roadmap. And we want to review the query language in OpenID for VP because that's the source of complaint by some implementers. It's too complex. There are security risks involved with the use of JSON path and so on. So we want to have a discussion about that. We will have a discussion about valid attestation. Paul already mentioned that. We want to discuss the Chromium proposal to deprecate URLs. Seems to be important to us, right? Okay.
Not at all.
So we have 2 demo tables this time. So going to show a couple of very interesting demos. I already mentioned I want to do a survey on open source projects around OpenID for VC, but also SDJOT at ILW. Yeah, and there will be other sessions as well. Next slide, please. This is the last one. So as Christina already mentioned, the voting has opened for the implementers draft for OpenID for VP. So please go ahead, scan the QR code and vote. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and last but not the least, there's a website dedicated to this work. URL is pretty simple, openid.net/openid for VP, 4 being number 4. It as OpenID for VC. We are keeping it up to date. It has links to all the specifications. It has links to all the open source implementations we are aware of, both Wallet, Verifier, Assure, and there are quite some emerging. There are URLs to OFC projects, ARF. There are, for example, 16 OpenID for VC compliant wallets in EBSI project in Europe. There are links to all of that. So highly recommend checking it out. In addition to voting, of course.
Okay, any questions?
We have one online from Taka.
All right.
Hi, Taka.
He was asking if there's any plans to create a new OpenID Foundation working group dedicated to verifiable credentials.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think that's a great idea. We're gonna discuss that. I think today.
If everyone can help lobby the board so we can get an approval. Just kidding. Yeah, it's not even.
Just a quick one on that. I believe the authority, and Mike Jones will be the gospel on this, is that the authorities with the specifications committee, which is comprised of the working group co-chairs. They would determine and go through the formal approval process if there's to be a, let's say, formal evolution of the special topic group into its own working group.
Yeah, just for the record, by design, the board has no say about whether a working group gets created. A set of editors does that.
Thank you, Mike. So excellent question from Taka. Clearly, it's a hot topic of conversation. Several of the board members are also working group co-chairs. So conveniently, when we will talk about it later today, and hopefully at IIW, we'll get into more detail on that due process. Thank you. Tremendous amount of work. So delighted to see the progress since 6 months ago in the last IIW workshop. Lots is happening. And of course, this week, I think you'll have even more to update right by the end of the week, maybe blog post worthy or something like that. So thank you again, Torsten and Christina. We're going to move on to the next block, which is going to be on eKYC and IDA. Let me progress the slides. Or you got it? Okay. Please, Mark Hain again on his plane on his way. So Torsten kindly agreed to step in and provide the update for Mark.
Yeah, so I'm not Mark Hain, obviously. So, but Mark asked me to step in, so that's okay because I'm the editor of that spec, so I think I can do that. So eKYC, the identity assurance spec or OpenID Connect for identity assurance is an extension to OpenID Connect to provide a standardized scheme and extensions to provide relying parties with metadata about the provenance and the assurance level, all that stuff. For claims, so with that removing any ambiguity regarding those elements. We have been working on that spec for 4 years now, so started that work in 2019, as far as I remember. And well, we are close to final publication of OpenID Connect for identity assurance, so that's big achievement. Yeah. Okay. But I think I'm gonna mention that, or I'm supposed to mention that on a later slide. Yeah. Okay. So we have the OpenID Connect for identity assurance spec. We managed to get the JOT claims registry request submitted to IANA, which is important because in the end, the specification defines a new set of claims then can be used in JOTs. I mean, they can be used in user info responses and ID tokens, but they can be used in other JOTs as well. And we have other specifications. We have the advanced syntax for claims. And that specification started as a simple question. How can we do that? Is someone over 18? How can we solve that problem? Pretty easily. And we first discussed an approach that is, for example, taken by ISO to have those claims is older than 18, 19, 20, 21, and so on. And that turned into a new query language, right? That was designed by Daniel Fett mainly, and it's pretty cool stuff. It also allows, for example, a relying party to specify the conditions under which the relying party wants to see the response. So for example, if a relying party says, if you do not give me the family name, the birth date, and the place of birth, then just don't give me any result at all, because it doesn't mean anything to me, and I don't want to pay for the claims. And then we've got OpenID Connect for authority. This is an extension that helps to express, for example, authority for a natural person to act on behalf of a company, right? Yeah, and there seems to be an emerging interest in also defining profiles of OpenID for identity assurance for certain domains. All right, I already mentioned that. We're on the final mile for a publication. And also other organizations took note of the work on OpenID Connect for identity assurance. So at W3C, for example, there's a draft to use the IDA schema, especially the verification subclaim that contains all the metadata about the claim, and put that in the evidence element in a VC according to the 1.1 specification to convey this kind of data in a verifiable credential. OIX also uses the specification as reference point for their global interoperability working group. That's their effort in the context of the GAIN initiative, right, Gail? Sorry? The OIX Global Interoperability Working Group, that's their contribution to GAIN, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it also is utilized in this OIX initiative that helps and facilitates the GAIN initiative. And there are further projects using beyond those existing implementations, for example, at ID4Me or yes.com, that utilize the OpenID Connect for IDE spec, which is TISA in the UK, Connect ID or Estima. Thank you. And TBD block also using that in combination with the verifiable credential data model. Oh my God. All right. Yeah. The working group right now is facing challenges that everyone that ever has tried to bring a specification to final already has faced. We could continue to work on the specs for years or a decade, because there's always more implementers feedback coming up, and you could improve the spec, but you somehow need to cut and publish, and that's the situation the working group is right now. So. And I think that's a good idea, because what typically happened the last 1 or 2 years is the feedback coming back from the implementers was to extend the schema with new evidence types and other stuff, so which could go into extensions to the spec, basically, because the basic concept of the container for the claims and the related metadata is stable for the last 3 years. So, all right, so. OIX wants to use the syntax outside of the protocol. I think that can be done and is already demonstrated by the W3C draft. And with the latest development in the VC 2.0 data model, I guess we could also directly use the IDA syntax within JOT VCs going forward, which would make that even easier. Yeah. And 4 entities are waiting for the FIMAP application to implement it. So I think summary is the specification, even though it is more complex and is in a niche of verified data with high assurance level, there is a broad adoption of that specification. All right, that's the plan. Q2 for the final review, and Q3 for publication of the OpenID Connect for identity assurance specification, and putting the advanced syntax for claim on the authority implementers draft forward in Q3. And I think, yeah, projects are already live. So I think that's not going to happen in Q4 of 2023. But I think the projects that we're waiting for the final publication can go on and proceed then. All right. Not much to discuss this week, as it seems. Okay, so Mark wants to discuss this week mainly how OpenID Connect for identity assurance syntax can be utilized with verifiable credentials. So, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And it also fits into other discussion points that we will have this week in the context of verifiable credentials and the VC 2.0 data model. And with that, I'm done with this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Franz.
Appreciate it. So we're going to go right into the next session because we're getting a little tight on time. So thank you. If you have questions for Torsten or the imaginary Mark Hain, then do keep them. We'll have some questions at the end. So we're going to jump forward a few slides. You'll have to speed through Nat's section. Nat had to step out for a few minutes, everyone. So we're flip-flopping 2 sessions. And John will take us through the iGov working group update. Thank you, John.
Hi, John Bradley, iGov Workgroup Chair. So the iGov Workgroup has been around for a number of years. We've taken our specs through first implementers draft, and a number of countries have based their citizen to government federations upon them. In the US, France, Morocco, number of countries. So Italy has asked us to take the specs final because they want us to be able to produce conformance tests that they can ask the commercial relying parties to undergo. So they're putting pressure on us to move forward. We've had a recent contribution from MITRE on updating. Oh, that's probably the next slide. So we have basically two specifications. One is the iGov profile for OpenID Connect. The other is a profile that talks about the underlying OAuth framework. So MITRE's contribution, which they've done for a number of US government agencies, is a profile that basically takes our OAuth 2 profile and updates it to the proposed changes to align with the proposed changes for OAuth 2.1. So we're looking at that. We're also trying to reconcile some of the changes since we originally did the iGov profiles. We now have OpenID Connect Federation, or whatever that winds up being called. I'm sure Torsten will throw something at me. But a number of the governments are using that, so we need to make sure that the final profile doesn't step on anyone's ability to use some of the new OpenID profiles like the Federation draft. We want to get a new implementers draft out sometime before the middle of this year and hopefully take it final by the end of the year. So this work is not as sexy as the wallet work, but surprisingly enough, there are still a lot of governments that want to do very bread and butter federation. They have agencies that want to use, say, a single sign-on provided by, say, the civil registry in France or Italy, and be able to have those people using their national ID system be able to log in and get services across multiple departments. So these profiles say how to do that in a secure way, and have been fairly widely adopted by governments. So as we refine this, eventually we will probably also come up with guidance as to how some of these newer wallet-based specifications can be added on to more traditional federations, because they are essentially issuers of credentials. So that will be future work, but we're going to try and finish off the basics of how to do basic OpenID Connect redirect-based single sign-on across government services. So that's what we have. Any questions? And Nat's just
still not
entering
back.
the room.
Oh,
So he
fresh
can,
off the press.
yeah.
Well, as we wait to see if there's any questions coming in online on iGov, obviously good news to see both the U.S. government, the Italian government looking to continue to develop the specifications to meet their requirements, and couldn't agree more, John, on their need to kind of serve their residents on a day-to-day basis before some of these new technologies come along.
So wallets are and verifiable credentials are cool and trendy, but you know, people still have desktop computers, and
So got to get
trying to
stuff
get
done.
everyone up to speed with the latest technology is going to take a while. So there's still some run room for traditional federation.
Very much so. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mr. Bradley. Much appreciated. And so we'll call up Nat for our next session. Going back a few pages to FAPI. There's your and then I'll give you the power, Nat. There you go.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is this a... Oh, okay. So thank you very much. So I'm Sakimura, the co-chair of the FAPI working group. Let me stand on the side so that I can see the slide. I don't have it in my mind, right? So the objective of the working group is to create general purpose, high security profiles for OpenID Connect and OAuth. It used to be financial API security profile, and because of the popular demands from other industry sectors, we changed the name to financial grade, and even that was too intrusive, so we just made it FAPI without any explanation. Okay. It's got several notable aspects on it. One is that we use the formal verification extensively. It's the mathematical proof of the security properties. So all our specifications are actually formally verified before getting to final. We have close collaboration with national regulators and associations like Australia, Brazil, UK, and many of those governments are actually sponsoring our works, especially the formal verification parts and the creation of the test suite. And we are also trying to be ISO directive compliant when we are writing down the spec, so that the translation and the adaptation and so on and so forth is actually going to be easier. And we have national level certifications going on. For the published specifications, we've got those three as a final specifications, and for the implementers draft, we've got those three, and we have active drafts as it's written down there. They are progressing quite at a healthy pace with a consensus, and we are pretty rigid on the process as well, which is a good thing. And as far as adoption is concerned, for FAPI 1, we've got a whole bunch of places adopted, and some of them are ready to move to FAPI 2.0. And although FAPI 2 is not final yet, some jurisdictions are venturous enough to adopt them. You know, it's prone to change, but still they're adopting the FAPI 2.0. So for example, Norway, Health ID e-health systems is adopting FAPI2 for Australia. Connect ID. If you have questions, you can ask Dima for that. They are adopting FAPI2, and in Germany, yes.com has adopted FAPI2. And we've got white paper, open banking and open data ready to cross borders and formal analysis. As far as formal analysis is concerned, we are done with FAPI 1.0 several years ago, and now we are doing that for FAPI 2.0 advanced. And SIBA. Well, sorry, FAPI 2.0 message signing is a new name. Anyways. All right, and certification. It's thriving for FAPI 1.0. I stopped counting how many because it's way too many to count right now. But if you go to that link, you can find all the certification results. And we are starting the certification for FAPI 2.0 as well. And working group roadmap. Well, most of those are kind of aspirational, even for the deliverables, because we can't really promise. But in Q2 2023, this year, we would ship the first implementers draft of FAPI 2.0 message signing, hopefully. And for Q3 in this year, the formal verification for FAPI 2.0 message signing and SIBA to be done. Maybe a bit iffy, but and for Q4, FAPI 2.0 message signing second implemented draft, probably because these formal verifications tend to find holes, right? Security holes in the protocol. So we need to fix them, and then we tend to go for another implementer's draft before going to the final. So that's true for all those three drafts that I've listed there. And hopefully in Q1 2024, final for FAPI 2.0 specs, but no promise. And that's it. Any questions?
Some comments while people prepare.
Please. And you should wait for microphone for the remote people.
Yeah, I have maybe a dumb question. So that's FAPI 2.0 message signing, FAPI SIBA, but not FAPI grant management for OAuth 2.0? Is that
FAPI what?
Is it the third one, the grant management for OAuth 2.0? Is that, does it not say FAPI in front of it because it's made somewhere else, or is it made in the FAPI working group?
It's made in FAPI working group.
Okay, great, thanks. I get it would be even longer if you added FAPI.
And if you want, you could put OpenID in front of it when it gets to the final specification, but please.
I had one comment, Nat, going back to your adoption slide. The foundation will be hosting a workshop at EIC, and Steiner Noem will be presenting on Norway's adoption of FAPI 2.0 at that workshop.
If you just stick on that, if you stay on that page for just a moment, a few other comments. So certification is over 2,400 certifications since the program was started. About 200 of them are just over the last year are from mandates. So Brazil and Saudi Arabian mandates for their government where you need to conform, and they're leaning towards the mandates both for the OP side as well as the RP side at often our recommendations. So we're glad to see them making that traction. There's also Dima is here representing the Connect ID community, and they're thinking about mandates as well, which would be really cool. That's the first private sector implementation that would be implementing FAPI and moving towards mandates. So we'll see how that evolves. But obviously good to see them implementing on FAPI 2, and they've been very active members and contributing to the development of the FAPI 2 tests. We've also in the last couple of months done a couple of great things. So you heard the security analysis was completed on FAPI 2. That was co-funded with the Australian government, which is, I think, again, fantastic to see them not only investing in the work, collaborating with us, but that they value it, and it's important enough to them to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars ensuring the security analysis is in situ. We've also been engaging closely with the Canadian open banking community to kind of just give them the facts and what we've been seeing in other implementations. I'm going to come around, so I'm on video. But so with the Canadian open banking community to make sure that they have the facts they need as they're going through their own rulemaking right now, and they want to move quickly from clearly law into action and accelerating the work in Canada. We've also briefed the CFPB, responding formally to their rulemaking here in the US, and went in to brief them in person a couple of months ago as they go through their rulemaking process here in the US. And the list goes on. We know in Latin America, 3 new countries are coming along. So in Colombia, Chile, and Mexico, they're all going through their own due process. In other parts of the world, and in Asia in particular, are doing the same. So there's more work going on than, to some degree, the FAPI working group and the foundation is able to stay fully across. And that's one of the reasons Mark Hain has come on as what's the term we use for Mark's role? Distinguished engineer, to assist with some of that outreach, helping with the development in the pipeline, managing some of those relationships, and making sure we're actually covering the demand that we're seeing cascading around the world right now. So really exciting times in the FAPI group.
Yes, lots of those happening. Still not into the verifiable credential kind of wall, but plenty of things. Any other questions? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Nat. Take a click on forward a couple of slides. I think we've got Bjorn. Might be you, Bjorn. There we go.
I'm Bjorn. I'm the co-chair of the Moderna Working Group. So the initial purpose was to support work that GSMA, which is a industry organization for the telecom industry, to work on standards to support some of the product specification that GSMA developed to enable mobile network operators or wireless carriers to be identity providers. And so the working group works on profiles for the specific use case and also additional extension for OpenID Connect for related initiatives. So this is a slide of the various companies that have contributed to the working group. And so where the working group is right now is to the right, you see the specification status. And so we have one, the CBAR core specification is in final specification status. There are 2 profiles, one for FAPI, one for Moderna. There's also, for the implementers draft, there's the authentication profile, which is where you would utilize your mobile device for authentication. There's an account porting specification that is generically written to port a account from one IDP to another. And the way it was used in GSMA is using your phone number. So if you had sign up for any service with one mobile operator, you would be able to use the specification to port your account to another MNO. The way the spec is written is you can use it for your email account as well. It doesn't change it. And then we also have something called the user questioning API. That's something that Orange proposed, and it's similar to CBA, where there's a server-initiated communication with a mobile device, and it's more answering questions than what the CBA core had specified. Again, we have a few working drafts that we are either in various status. So the working group has agreed to, based on issues being raised to create an errata to CBA, as well as an extension based on a use case in the KYC IDA working group. And we're also drafting an IETF draft for IANA registry of CBA endpoints. That was something that was discovered as part of you implementing CBA functionality. So that's something that the working group is working on right too. And then in addition to that, there's discussion about creating or creating drafts for work within 3GPP as well as GSMA to create a profile of that functionality. So again, I mentioned GSMA. So there is continuous work within GSMA on Mobile Connect evolution and new use cases for utilizing and well, where an MNO would be some kind of IDP or attribute verifier. There's also a service that's referred to as rich communication services. It was a way of combining a set of services with an user-friendly interface. And there are OpenID Connect part of that, specifically to what's referred to as MAP or chatbots. And also, there's a specification that allows for changing your embedded SIM. In the old days, we took out a SIM card. Today, it's an electronic copy of that profile. And as you have a new device, it has an eSIM in it. So you, in essence, download a new profile to connect to a new operator. And there's portions of that that leverage OpenID Connect for user interaction, such as agreeing to terms and conditions of the service, etc. And you want to make sure that the actual user signing up for a subscription actually agrees to the terms. So that's why OpenID Connect is used. I mentioned 3GPP, so they have a functionality called referred to as mission critical services. It is a architecture for first responders for various functionality. And as part of that functionality, in order to get priority service, the first responder has to authenticate themselves in order to get access to that domain. And so they defined a mission critical profile or mission critical OpenID Connect profile. And so that is where the reference to the working group status is to take what's in a 3GPP specification and make it a profile. There's also something referred to as service enabler architecture layer, where they utilize the components of the architecture and mission critical services to utilize for various vertical applications. So you have an application that utilizes reuses functionality that's defined within this common capability that is within SEAL. And similar to mission critical services, there is an OpenID Connect profile for it. So if you need identity services through SEAL, you use an OpenID Connect profile that 3GPP defined. And just a final note in terms of outreach, there is a liaison between the OpenID Foundation and ETSI. So ETSI is the European Telecom Standards Organization. They do various work, everything from cryptography to virtualization, etc., that touches on some of the work that the foundation has expertise in. And so the initial focus for this liaison was for the Open Wallet and some of the work that the Connect Working Group is doing on SIOP. And so, but there are additional work that ITSI is doing that is related to what the foundation has expertise in. So, and that is my presentation.
So just as a mention, Bjorn, we had talked about having some open discussions with some of the task force, for example, on the future of Materna and like, what would good look like in terms of future use cases, the specifications, what to stop, start, or continue. And I know we'll have those discussions probably in May at the next strategic task force, which is a subset of board members. I'm guessing it would also be useful if any of the members here have use cases in mind or thoughts on the specifications that aren't in your regular discussions. That would be good to feed into you or to me or whatever as well. Does that sound good? All right. Thank you very much, Bjorn. And our last session, at least from a working group update point of view, and then we'll have an open Q&A as Mr. Kapali. Yes, you made it.
I missed my flight this morning. So the air train wasn't working, and the air train is the only way you can get to the terminal. So it wasn't good. Anyway, hi, everyone. Good to see everyone. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Shared Signals Working Group. A quick overview. This should be fairly quick. We've done a lot of core work with the spec, a lot of working through issues, but we're making a lot of progress. If you're not familiar with it, really the goal is to enable the sharing of security events cross-domain between different parties, right? That could be identity systems, that could be down to a network switch or a Wi-Fi access point, right? The goal is to kind of disambiguate all that and make it flexible to support any of those use cases. Anyone who can kind of receive essentially an HTTP webhook and translate it into their own policy language, that's a great use case for it, which makes it super flexible. The three specifications that are under development that make up Shared Signals is the Shared Signals Framework. Last time we were here, you probably heard that referred to as SSE, Shared Signals and Events. We hinted at it last time, but we did do a rename again. Hopefully this is the last one. Everyone can quote me every time we've said that for 3 years, but SSE Gartner took, and we are not going to beat Gartner, so we changed to SSF. And there's only one conflict, which is OpenSSF, which has no relationship, and we think it's good enough that we're SSF and they're OpenSSF. But that's the core framework. You can think of that as management and transports, right? So I want to say, I want to subscribe to these events about this user. I want to subscribe to these events about this group, this tenant, right? Whatever flexibility you need there. That's the core SSF framework, Shared Signals Framework. It also profiles a bunch of IETF specs like security event tokens, set push and set pull for a webhook or a fetch. All of that is kind of defined in SSF. That's the big one, right? That's the big spec. The event definitions, right? So actually, when we're thinking about what type of events do you want to send, those are in two smaller specs. We can treat those more or less like dictionaries, right? In an ideal world, we would make them an IANA registry, but they need a little bit more context than just being, a dictionary list in an IANA registry. So we have profiled those into CAPE and risk. You can think of CAPE as the zero trusty type stuff, right? Session revocation, compliance change, all of the ironically, the stuff Gartner talks about, right? And then risk is the one that's been around for a while. Risk is really about the account level changes, right? Account disabled, account enabled, password change, more of it actually, funny enough, aligns closer to SCIM, but for more real-time event sharing, whereas SCIM is more authoritative on a periodic sync. So those are the three core specs. Risk has been around for a long time. The original SSF spec was actually also called risk, and we split them out as new use cases came about, has it been 5 years at all? That's where CAPE came from, and then we rebranded to SSF, and it was SSE, and so here we are. I want to highlight, so Atul, one of the co-chairs back there, he just launched this site, cape.dev, which is, I believe, our first fully functioning reference implementation. So this actually allows you to go in and test receiving events, right? When this is the feedback we've gotten over the past few years, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, is until there's a reference implementation that's live and people can click and just test their stuff and play, success is tough, right? So this is fantastic, and thanks to Signal, Atul's company, for doing this. And you can go ahead and play. It's open. You just have to create an account with is that what it is?
Just register and
yeah.
It's very simple.
Perfect. So that went live last week, I think. So fresh off. In terms of what we've been working on, so 4 big focus areas. We've been in an implementer's draft stage for quite some time, actually, but we're really thinking about the feedback we got was dense. So we're trying to make sure that we really address all of those, and there was some ripple effects between other issues that we needed to address. So that's taken some time. Over the past 4 months or so, we've spent a lot of time going through all the issues. Some of the issues span 5, 7 years before Atul and I were even part of the group. So we didn't want to just close them. We actually wanted to give them some thought. So those have made it from Bitbucket to GitHub, and now we actually looked at them and triaged them, and we probably took about 10 of the 35 or so that we think are critical for the next, before going to the next implementers draft. The other piece is we've had some new eyes over the past 6 months as well. So getting fresh feedback without any of the baggage of the 5 years of spec work is super helpful. I always love having the fresh eyes on the spec. We've got a lot of really good questions that were super obvious to us that really needed a lot more spec text to explain. So if you're interested in doing that for us, please let us know. It's not neither of the 3 specs are very long. And there's the normal industry engagement, right? So Atul will be at EIC. We're going to have a session at Identiverse as well. So just trying to get, there's a lot of interest in the industry, but adoption, as we all know, in all these working groups remains a challenge. We're hoping like Cape.dev will help. Cisco has also been doing a lot of work with evangelization. And Microsoft has supported a small piece of the specs. We hopefully will get to a point where we're implementing the entire stack. In terms of deliverables, right? So we actually hope to get implementers draft number 2 and a Cape implementers draft number 3 out, let's say the second half of the year. I'm not going to get specifics to a quarter, but we do think that's achievable. We've made a lot of progress in the past few months. The engagement on the working group calls has been much higher than in the past. So we have a lot of people helping out. And then we're hoping we keep hearing this desire to have deployment guidance. And now that we have Cape.dev as well, I think we have some things to point people to, maybe create a playground, like almost like a demo guide as well, because that is always anything new like this. It's just a challenge to get started with. So it could be as simple as a getting started guide, or it could go deeper into I actually want to build this thing and give me some guidance on it. And stretch goal, right? We obviously want to get the 1.0 out. It's been 5-6 years. So I think we're looking probably into early 2024, but we definitely are on track for the implementers drafts for 2023, which is great. The membership has been stable in the group, which we haven't had in a long time. It was a lot of new people, and then people drop off like every working group. But there's been a kind of core group of 6 or 7 companies that are committed and helping with PRs and engaging in good discussion. So we're optimistic that we can actually start meeting some of these deadlines. What is it?
Anybody there has questions, then I'll.
I tried to get you time back. You're going to be questions?
Yeah. If anybody else comes up with questions, I think there was also a potential action from the working group to think about doing some sort of descriptive content, like how to use this, what is it all about, why does it matter, so that those who are not necessarily pure geeks, but hello, test. So to do something like that. And I think, I'm not sure how far that's gotten since a month or two when it was conceived, but is that still an idea on the roadmap?
Yeah, it's in the brainstorming phase. We were thinking about it. I think Cape.dev was one example of that, but yeah, let's see.
Yeah, and I was also thinking of anything else other than the specs themselves you're thinking about to engage, like MITRE and other conversations you've been having.
Yeah, I mean, I have spoken to MITRE and a bunch of folks in the government sector about, Cape. It's just interest at this point, no plans of implementation. But to your point about the sort of FAQ or, learning content, some of that is on cape.dev right now, and we are going to license it under Creative Commons license to OpenID Foundation, and in the site redesign, we'll be incorporating that into the OpenID Foundation website.
Super, thanks, gentlemen. You got lots of work for crossing the divide. Dick, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. Is it on? Tim, the SCIM working group in ITF spun up again, and it's building on sets. Are you thinking of doing anything similar like that in, what's it called now, SSF?
Yeah, so I believe the SCIM events spec, is that the right name, Pam? SCIM events is planning to use SSF as a management framework for it.
Right. Any thoughts on having OpenID define claims, doing a similar thing to what the SCIM is, but using
like bringing what they're defining into OpenID essentially, or
no, doing the same thing they're doing, but using OpenID claims instead of the SCIM syntax.
Yeah, the way I understood the SCIM events work is that was going to be more management for the protocol itself, not for actually passing traditional events. That was the last time I looked at it. It was like for the operation of the protocol, not for like direct management events, not for what we would typically convey via SSF profiles. Is that still right, Pam? ish.
My understanding reading through it was sort of another way of moving skim data like updates, provisioning, deprovisioning.
And but it wasn't like those events didn't carry the actual data, right? It just said go call home that there was an update, right?
No, it carried the data.
Oh, okay. So I haven't looked at it in a bit then. Yeah. So the one keying off that question a little bit, the nice thing about SSF is it does not restrict you from using custom profiles, right? So you could argue the IETF skim events profile. We could pull that into OpenID, but it also can operate on its own. We would like to get to a point where we don't have to kind of go through the typical spec review process for event dictionaries, right? Adding an event, like you shouldn't have to go through the 90-day implementer draft and all this just to add one event, for example. So we do want to make that easier, and I think the skim work would take advantage of that as well.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Atul. Thank you to the shared signals and events or framework, whatever we're calling the group now. Shared signals. Doesn't roll off the tongue anymore. Okay, great. So we have closed the formal part of the agenda. So we thought we'd at least open up this part of the conversation before we get into chit chat and gossiping amongst ourselves. Nat and I thought we'd just facilitate if anybody wanted to kind of pose any macro questions that they're seeing, across the industry, or any macro questions on what you've seen today on the white papers, the different working groups. There's obviously a lot of questions we'll all be wrestling to ground in open discussions in IIW. But in that spirit, we thought amongst the OpenID Foundation community, we'd at least open up the question, see if any of you have some thoughts, things you'd like to get other members' feedback on. Vittorio and Nat and I were having 2 hours worth of conversation last night. You couldn't shut us up. Heather, we were talking offline about some of the privacy challenges like data minimization that aren't unsolved. So if any of these things are niggling on you, we wanted to kind of see if you wanted to prompt any questions for the group.
Anything? If you wanted to talk about privacy frameworks and something like that, I have
You
my
ready to tap
both
dance?
tips toes into the OECD privacy guideline things, because I was in the revision of that thing, as well as I'm the editor of ISO 29100 privacy framework. Actually, like 60–70% of my work is on that side.
You got questions
So-
for Nat?
So I do actually have some questions in that. So we've got this white paper, and it does point heavily to different frameworks, and it does offer some recommendations that I hope will generate discussion, which leads to my question of where ongoing should these discussions happen, right? There's a lot of different stakeholders involved, and each of them should, if if my paper is successful, actually take stuff away and think about it. So
John Linder thinks he has all the answers.
he has all the answers, all of them.
I'm saying come to my working group and we'll have those discussions.
Well, actually, you need to use microphone, please, because online people won't be able to hear.
No, I wasn't saying I have all the answers. You know better than that. But I am saying come to the Cantera Privacy Enhancing Mobile Credentials Working Group, and we can have those discussions there. That's a good place for them.
Very good.
Okay, so for OECD privacy guidelines, you need to be in OECD, obviously, but you can be, right? And the OpenID Foundation actually is a member of ITAC, or you could go through the civil society route, like, if you are a member of one of those groups. I mean, the list is published, so you can be there. For ISO 29100 things, it's actually happening now in Redmond, in Microsoft campus. And I was out like for 1 hour in the aisle down there because to join the call there. But yeah, I mean, there are ways to get involved, and obviously ISO and OpenID Foundation has a liaison partnership. So as OpenID Foundation rep, you can also be there. So that's one of the beauty of being a member of OpenID Foundation.
So I don't think we have all the answers yet, Heather. At least there's a few of the existing communities that exist. But I think part of what your papers are prompting is that some of the governance models are not there yet. Like the institutions don't necessarily exist to help us answer some of the multilateral challenges. They could adapt, they could evolve to solve those questions, but they're not quite there yet, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
But and I wanted to point out that Kantara is a good place, as well as, Kantara people are at the SC27 Working Group 5. And that seems to be a good place because EDPB and European Data Protection Board and all sorts of the privacy regulators are actually there.
Yeah.
So,
So for
not
those-
just waiting. You need to get there to talk to them, right? That's my take.
And so that's probably a good thing for this week, right? Knowing your paper is wrapping up for comments before the 24th. If there are some obvious destinations like that to take
Yes.
these conversations, we need to make sure they're included.
It just didn't occur to me. We should send it out to the ISO and ask for the comment.
There you go. Yeah, indeed.
I would love that. And if they actually are willing to read 65 pages in less than a week and give me comments, I will be stunned.
So how many pages is your document is?
Not including the front matter. It's 65 pages long.
65 pages. Expect like 300 comments.
Perfect.
I was just going to add to what I said earlier in the context of this audience. One of the ways I'm increasingly trying to frame the privacy discussion in a technical audience is that a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is out-of-band governance issues that need to affect the way you implement the protocols. So it becomes much fuzzier and involves contracts and terms and things like that. So that's always a tricky interface between that fuzzy space and the technical protocols you often talk about here. So that's a good conversation to have, and all of those venues.
Thank you, John. Any other themes of topics, please, Judith?
So I want to just kind of pose this to OpenID Foundation and other organizations that I see represented in the room here. The people in this room and on this call have been working with identity and all of these issues for years. We're the ones that know, the different things to ask about privacy, about governance, etc. And yet we have all these organizations working on little pieces of it. So I just want to pose the question, how can we as various organizations working on different pieces of it from different angles coordinate better so that we can not be competing with what we're doing, but be enhancing each other's organization and have that clarity that John was asking for at the very beginning and opening today of who's doing what. So I'm just kind of posing that question out there to say, how can we, the experts in this room and on this call, come together so it isn't OpenID for verifiable credentials, decentralized identity, because it's all identity. And, we recognize at Trust Over IP Foundation that the work that Christina and Torsten and all the people on verifiable credentials for OpenID for verifiable credentials is the stepping stone to bridge from one place to the other. And I think there's going to be this morphing that happens as more and more governments tackle these issues of both privacy and security. And how do we help together? That's just my big question mark on my own head today.
I wish if I had an answer, right? Just calling up a privacy, general, privacy framework session, for example, at IAW, is hard, right? People just seem to want to talk about what they are interested at, but it has to be, seen holistically, and that gets very abstract very quickly, and it often loses interest or interest span of the people. And it's my long-term questions as well. How to get that interest and attention of relevant people into the relevant pieces of the work. And that's, if you have an answer or if you have any suggestion, please. It's really hard.
I'll just air the dirty laundry. At Trust of RIP, we often get very pigeonholed into, oh, well, that's that future thinking. And we realize very much that we're 5 years out from where implementation needs to happen today, right? And so there's that tug of war that you're talking about of, I have a limited amount of time to spend on something today, and what do I need to get done next quarter? And so it's like, and how do I sit here with people are like, yeah, let's get to implementation. How do we get this to implementation? But if we implement too fast, then these privacy and concerns that are maybe more esoteric and take more time and takes much more listening and understanding the perspective across countries. I think somebody mentioned it earlier today, just with the taxes and how that's very different. Those things take time. So how do we simultaneously do these two things together and make it very clear, this is where you go to do this, this is where you go to do this, and then people don't have to fragment their time across multiple situations. So it's just a question. I would like to have the answer to this by the end of IIW, if that's possible.
I'll just add to Nat's comments, and maybe Judith, that's a topic, whether it's for the EDs or other interested parties, is curious about the natural structure. Like the way that I often frame it is there are scarce resources, right? The time of the people in this room often volunteering is a scarce resource, and the number of experts globally is relatively constrained, and they are spread across different organizations, sometimes cross-pollinating, sometimes not. So if you look at a strategic problem like saying we should have substantially different identity infrastructure, is it 10 years out, 20 years out, but what's the walk back to make it happen faster? And how do you use the scarce resources you have, knowing that there won't be one solution, right? There will be multiple different concurrent solutions. So how do you garner and channel all of that wonderful expertise? And it doesn't matter if it's private sector motivation or government sector motivation. It's like that's a human resource capacity, and the nonprofit community plays a vital role of bridging between the private sector and the public sector, to state the obvious. And they don't get it either. Like the government doesn't really get it either, like how to harness the expertise that the nonprofit community can offer. So I think it's a great topic for this week. Maybe a group of us will come up with some creative ideas on how to do things a bit more wisely.
Yeah, and that's not only for privacy, but so last night.
Use that as an example.
Yeah, I know. So I'll throw an interesting thought. Last night we were talking about gender biases in identity proofing or onboarding, right? And weaponizing that to exclude some people. And that's very real, but often in the technical community, they get overlooked. And that's one of the reasons why we don't want to decide purely on the technical basis, but we need to reach out to civil societies or the researchers on those, academic, things and researchers and disciplines, right?
Yeah.
And so, please.
Wanted to ask the next question, so I didn't want to interrupt.
All right. So yeah, that's really important. Not, we want to hurry, but not too much.
Please, Atul.
I mean, pulling on the same thread of sort of working together, do we have any liaison or any discussions with the CNCF? I see some interest building in the SPIFFy part of CNCF about identity. And, I didn't know if like anything.
Who's CNCF?
Cloud Native Computing Foundation.
No, I don't think we have formal liaison.
Do we have any OpenID liaison or anything going on with CNCF and OpenID Foundation?
I'm not sure. So CNCF,
Cloud Native Foundation, Computing Foundation, CNCF is another Linux Foundation project. It's where Kubernetes and 150 other projects sit under CNCF. I'm not sure, but I'm happy to look and to see if there are specific working groups that are happening there, or if anybody else in the room knows.
I don't think OpenID Foundation has formal liaison with CNCF. Our old member William Dennis is very deeply involved in Kubernetes, so he might be involved in CNCF, but that's the informal path, right? I don't think we have a formal path.
Any other big picture questions or things to riff on? Please, Cassie.
I'm going to start with a more specific question to Heather. So as you mentioned, I only briefly walked through the paper, but I'll read more. But you've done a great kind of comprehensive research on existing kind of articles where research on government issued credentials, right? I wonder, do you you list some of them, and there are probably more, but do you see kind of an even kind of qualities of these papers? The reason why I'm asking it is a good thing is more people are paying attention to digital identity, but not everyone has the level of expertise, right? And it's quite complicated. I'm coming from business kind of background, not technical, but I started my work in digital identity at the beginning of COVID. So and that's when I started to realize it's so complicated. And now more and more organizations are jumping into kind of talking about it. Do you see that kind of uneven quality of content out there? Because some organizations can be quite influential, right? When the words they're saying, the paper they're writing. So that's my first question to you. And then a bigger picture question is, what OpenID Foundation, are your strategy in terms of, guiding the market, right? Whether government or private sector, when it comes to content that are probably could be misleading and also quite influential. So that's two.
So one of the things that Elizabeth and I kept going back and forth on, because we tried our best to align our thoughts on papers and compare notes, and regularly it was, wait, did you see that paper? Wait, where did that paper come from? Why am I this far in the process and still discovering more content and more content and more content, some of which should be really influential, and that it wasn't being referenced, and we didn't know why. We still don't know why. But so I would say, yes, what's out there is very uneven. I would say, based on my observations, not just with this paper, but as the principal editor for the ID Pro body of knowledge, people's patience in reading papers is definitely going down. And so you're getting more blog posts. You're getting more, how much can I tell you about the complexities of privacy in 1,500 words or less, right? So there's a lot of influential material that way. People, now putting my librarian hat on, because that is my background, is I was supposed to be a librarian when I grew up. People don't know how to search for data. So they're going straight to their favorite web browser and putting in search terms, and they're getting these blog posts, which may have no basis other than someone's opinion, and they cannot tell the difference. So there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of confusion. On top of that, I think what I was noticing in some of the different countries that I was researching, not all of which ended up in the paper, because while they were doing some fun things with digital transformation, they hadn't actually reached the credential stage. And that was why were they doing it? And there were definitely some powerful motivations of countries that were looking at it as an economic driver. And therefore, what they considered, acceptable risk in order for the return that they were after was actually really different from other countries, which were looking at it as more of a, how can I make things, convenient for my constituency? At the end of the day, they were trying to get to more or less the same place, but what they were doing, and therefore what compromises they were willing to make, was very different. And that sometimes reflected in the literature, depending on what country you were researching at any given time. I hope that answered your question.
I'll just riff a little bit to say, when I think the board entered into drafting these white papers, we've done 7 since last year, or almost completed 7 since last year. And I think almost all of them have been in partnership with other organizations, right? Trying to have a wider stance, trying to have a more as unbiased a view as you can, right? We all have a level of bias, but trying to take a more unbiased stance is that we have found that, I think, Gail's personal view, that it's mostly been a useful exercise, right? Putting things down in writing, having a layperson view where things can be absorbable by those who are not complete experts so that it's more accessible content. What I feel like I'm also observing is the lack of structured academic research with a consortium of different academic universities that are addressing the questions that matter now, and that are providing the reference points for government officials writing their policy, or providing the reference points for us as a community to do analysis on the scale of an opportunity, right? So you can have your business case and be like, it's worth investing in this thing on data minimization and working on the standard behind it because it's got this prize at the end of it, right? This policy end game or this commercial end game that you can get to. So I think there's a real gap in the analysis, whether it's by the nonprofit community or by the academic community, and we need to kind of level all that up to play our role.
And Nat says I have to say the thing I was thinking about saying, which is building on Heather's point about the misinformation that's out there and people's, typing things into a search engine. I did do a lot of, probing into ChatGPT while writing this paper. I asked it questions to see where it might lead me, and I found that so much of what it told me was wrong. So much. Yeah. So I think that's reflective of what's out there on the internet. So yeah.
I had the same. My husband was prompting, what should Gail say as her speaking notes as the executive director, blah, blah, blah. And it was like giving me, and it was like 50% right, but it doesn't have in any way near the nuance or context of what this community offers.
Added value to me. Like it added value and it sped certain things up, but it also, if I didn't research them and check them,
yeah. Well, it's
danger.
I think many of you have kind of thought about this as ChatGPT has taken off, because that's another topic area. The board said maybe we want to think about a paper at some point or some sort of analysis to look at the AI sphere and how it overlaps with identity. I'll give you the one use case my husband came up with. He was like, well, I don't mind if I authorize my AI to book a restaurant reservation for me. Okay, I can trust my AI to do that particular task for me, take some trouble off. Yeah, that sounds really good. Well, is that equally good for the restaurant? What if you have all these people who are not necessarily real carbon people booking reservations into their restaurant and nobody actually shows up? That's not good for them. They don't really, there's no trust. You could have an absence of trust. So you still need to have a trust between the partners, even when you insert AI as an enabling entity or a function as part of that transaction. The need for our community's work doesn't magically disappear when you add AI into it. In fact, it could arguably get far, far, far worse.
Artificial identity.
There you go.
Artificial identity.
Quotable.
AI.
All right. I think with that, unless there's other parting comments, thank you all for showing up in person and online for the workshop today. I think we've got a little bit of time in the room until 4 o'clock for those who want to socialize. I'd like to ask those that are members of the executive committee to meet me outside, me and Nat outside, for a quick 5-minute chat because the board meeting is going to start at 4. But the rest of you, please feel free to enjoy yourself. We've got the room until 4. Thank you.
I love your question. You'd like to answer. That was a great question.